American Dad is the Seth MacFarlane show that nobody seems to argue about, and I've never fully understood why. Family Guy gets the essays, the theory videos, the endless discourse about whether it's the same show it used to be. American Dad just sort of got on with it, quietly built one of the strangest and most internally consistent worlds in American animation, and almost nobody went digging. So that's what we're doing tonight. A long, unhurried walk through the questions this show never answered. The alien with no planet, the man trapped in a goldfish, the cursed object that ruins everyone who touches it, and a fair few fan theories that people have built in the gaps, some of which are silly, and a couple of which I think are better written than they have any right to be. If you're enjoying this sort of thing, a subscribe is always appreciated. Otherwise, settle in. There's no rush with any of this. So, the alien in the attic. That's where we'll begin. Roger crash-landed at Roswell in 1947. That sounds like a joke, or at best a throwaway reference, and I think most people who watch this show casually file it away as one. It isn't. The show commits to it completely. Roger is the Roswell alien, the actual one from the actual incident that spawned about 70 years of conspiracy literature. He came down in New Mexico, he was recovered, and he ended up exactly where you'd expect a recovered alien to end up. Area 51. He was held there for a very long time. The show is a bit vague about the specifics, which I've always suspected is deliberate, because the specifics would be genuinely bleak. What we do know is that roughly 4 years before the pilot episode, Roger escaped, and in the process of escaping, he saved Stan Smith's life. Stan, being Stan, decided this created a life debt, and rather than hand the alien back to the agency that employs him, he took him home and installed him in the attic. That's the entire premise. A CIA agent is harboring the most significant fugitive in the history of the United States government in his loft, and has been for years, and the reason is that he feels he owes the bloke a favour. I love that. It's such a specifically Stan reason. Not compassion, not curiosity, not scientific interest. An obligation. Stan runs on obligations the way other people run on food. Now, the part of Roger's origin that I think is actually the saddest thing this show has ever written, and it's delivered in about 9 seconds as a punchline. There's an episode called Whiner of Our Discontent, where Roger is in one of his grander moods, and he explains that he wasn't just sent to Earth. He was chosen. He is, in his words, the decider. His species sent him here to observe humanity and pass judgment on whether we deserve to continue existing. The fate of the entire human race sits in his hands, which is why he's allowed to behave however he likes, because what are we going to do about it? Then Stan finds out the truth and takes enormous pleasure in telling him. Roger wasn't the decider. Roger was a crash test dummy. His people put him in a ship, told him a beautiful lie about cosmic significance, and fired him at a planet to see what would happen when the ship hit the ground. That's it. That's the whole mission. He was payload. And here's the thing that I find genuinely difficult to shake once you've noticed it. Roger built his entire personality on that lie, 1600 years old. And the one thing that made him special, the one thing that justified the ego and the cruelty and the sheer volume of himself, was a story someone told him to get him into the ship. Everything he's been doing on Earth since he landed is a man performing importance. He was told he had and turned out not to. The show plays it for a laugh and moves on. It actually does come back to it later, which is very American Dad. Let's talk about the age, because the numbers are worth sitting with. In an episode called Great Space Roaster, Roger gives his age as 1601. Not approximately, exactly. He's a man who knows his own birthday to the year, which, given he's celebrating it alone in a suburban attic in Virginia, is quietly grim. And in another episode, he estimates he's got somewhere around 9,000 years left in him, which would put the natural lifespan of his species somewhere in the region of 12,000 years. 12,000 years? He has been on Earth for less than 1% of his own life. Everyone he lives with will be dead in a rounding error. Steve will be gone before Roger's had time to change his mind about a haircut. I don't think the show has ever meaningfully engaged with that, and I understand why. It's a comedy. But it's sitting right there in the arithmetic. Here's a fun detail that most people miss entirely. Roswell wasn't Roger's first visit. There's an episode called Ortron Trail, where we find out he'd been to Earth once before in the 1800s. He was travelling with his aunt Caroline. Roger caused the ship to crash. Caroline died on impact, and Roger, stranded in the American West with no way home, attached himself to a family of pioneer fur trappers. They died on the Oregon Trail. So the pattern with Roger is established well before any of us meet him. He arrives, many of the people around him die, he survives, and he moves on to the next set. Twice now, he's been the sole survivor of a crash he caused. The show frames this as a bit. Read it flat, and it's a horror premise. And then there's the carving. In the season 13 premiere, there's a stone carving shown on screen. It depicts an alien with a very clear, physical resemblance to Roger, positioned above a pyramid, with two Egyptians apparently in the middle of worshipping him, surrounded by hieroglyphs. That's it. That's the whole thing. It appears, it's on screen, and the show never mentions it again, which leaves us with three options, none of which have been confirmed. Either Roger was on Earth in antiquity, which contradicts the arrival date unless he's lying about something, or a different member of his species was here thousands of years ago, which would mean his people have been visiting us since before recorded history, and the crash test program is only the most recent chapter. Or it's a joke and I'm overthinking a background asset. I lean towards the second one, personally. Mostly because his species clearly has functioning interstellar travel, and has clearly had it for a very long time, and the idea that they popped by, got worshipped by an entire civilization, and then filed Earth away as a suitable place to test structural integrity is exactly the sort of thing they'd do. Which brings me to the biology, because the biology is doing a lot of work in this show, and I don't think it gets enough attention. In an episode called Franny 911, it's established that Roger's species has to be unpleasant. Not chooses to be, has to be. If a member of his species suppresses their nastiness and behaves decently for too long, the unexpressed bitterness turns to poison in their body and kills them. The symptoms get progressively worse the longer they're nice. The show demonstrates this by having Roger genuinely try to be a good person and then watching him deteriorate. Now on the surface, that's a gag, a very good one, structurally, because it gives the writers a permanent license to make Roger do anything. But think about what it actually is. It's a medical excuse for a sociopath. It's the show building an in-universe justification for every appalling thing this character will ever do, handing it to the audience in season 4, and then almost never using it. Roger does invoke it. The Smiths don't invoke it. People do say, well, he can't help it, it's the poison thing. It doesn't just sit there in the canon, it's explicitly used as an explanation. And that raises the obvious question, which is whether it's true at all. Roger is the least reliable narrator in the show's history. He is a being who has, on the record, constructed hundreds of false identities with false histories and forged identification documents. The claim that his cruelty is biologically mandatory comes from Roger. There is no second source. The reason I find that so interesting is how neatly it maps onto the other lie. Roger's two most fundamental beliefs about himself are that he was cosmically important and that he can't help being awful. One of those has been proven to be a lie told to him by someone else. The other one he tells himself. I don't think that's an accident, but I also don't think it was planned. I think this show wrote a very funny character extremely well for a very long time and accidentally produced something with a spine. Anyway. That's how he got here, and roughly what he is. 1600 years old, twice a crash survivor, once possibly a god in Egypt, lied to about his purpose, and living in a loft in Virginia because a man in a suit decided he owed him one. But now, let's talk about what he actually does with all that time. Because the disguises are where this show stops being a sitcom and starts being something a bit harder to categorize. There's a moment in an episode about a horse therapist where Roger is walking down a corridor, chatting away, and he stops. Half a second of dead air. And Stan says with genuine dread that he hopes the horse whisperer isn't Roger this time. He opens the door. It isn't Roger, it's the real horse whisperer. I've always thought that's the single most revealing scene in the entire series, and it's over in about 4 seconds. Because it establishes something the show has otherwise been very careful not to say out loud, which is that Roger has genuinely lost track of his own personas. Not in a comedy amnesia way, in a way where he can walk into an appointment he booked and be surprised by who's sitting on the other side of the desk. Let's back up a bit, because the disguises started as a workaround and turned into the spine of the show. The original concept for Roger was Aleph. That's not me being cheeky, that's the actual pitch. He was going to sit in the house all day and make comments about human life, exactly like the alien from the 80s sitcom, and the Smiths would react to him. Simple, contained, and about as much material as you can get out of one room. The writers apparently found that unbearable almost immediately, so they let him out. And the moment they let him out, they'd created something that functions like a different guest star every single week, all of them voiced by the same bloke, which, as the production staff have pointed out, is a fairly outrageous showcase for MacFarlane, because a lot of these personas sound nothing like each other, and nothing like Roger. Some of them stuck around. The legman, who is the able-bodied half of the detective duo he runs with Steve, where Steve plays a paraplegic character called Wheels. Dr. Penguin, who at various points is the family's therapist. And Ricky Spanish, who has developed a reputation across Langley Falls, so notorious that people say his name in a horrified whisper. That's the funny version. Here's the version that stops being funny if you write it down as a list. Some of Roger's personas are currently in prison. Not as a bit, not as a plot for an episode. They exist, they were convicted, and they're serving time. Some of them are married, some of them have biological children, some of them are graduates of Howard University, which is a real institution that presumably has a real record of a grey alien in a wig completing a degree. And the crimes attached to these identities include robbery, sexual assault, police corruption, identity theft, drug trafficking, and child abuse. At least one persona is wanted in connection with a series of prostitute murders. At least one identifies as a serial killer. The show delivers all of that as background texture. It's a running gag, and I do think it works as a running gag because the delivery is so casual that you don't have time to build a picture. But if you sit down and assemble it, what you've got is a being who has committed an unknowable number of serious crimes under an unknowable number of names, and who cannot personally tell you how many of either there are. Now, the episode that takes this seriously, and it's one of my favourites in the whole run, is called The One That Got Away. Roger discovers he's missing a glove. Just a glove. And in trying to find it, he uncovers a persona he had no memory of creating. A man called Sidney Huffman. Sidney is clean. Sidney is decent. Sidney has a job at a department store. And a girlfriend called Judy. Sidney has been living an entire parallel life, and Roger has been the one living it at night, while having no conscious knowledge that it was happening. The origin of the split, when it comes back to him, is beautifully stupid, and then suddenly not stupid at all. Roger wanted a pair of gloves from the department store. He set up an elaborate theft, which required opening a credit card in the name Sidney, because that's the name the staff there knew him by. The theft went through. Judy got fired for it, and Roger felt guilty. That guilt is what triggered Sidney's emergence as a separate personality living his own life. That's the whole mechanism. Roger's guilt over ruining one woman's life was so intolerable that his mind physically split off a separate, decent person to carry it, and then hid that person from him. The resolution is that Roger stabs Sydney in the back, and the persona disappears. He murders the good version of himself, on screen, in a comedy. And then he goes and finds Judy and starts the relationship again, this time as himself, and the two of them walk off hand in hand. It's played as a happy ending. I'm not entirely sure it is one. What The One That Got Away establishes, and this matters for everything that comes after, is that the personas are not costumes. They are, at minimum, capable of becoming independent psychological entities without Roger's permission or awareness. And that takes us to the 200th episode, where the show made all of it literal. It's called The 200. It aired on the 28th of March, 2016, and it opens on a post-apocalyptic Langley Falls. Stan is wandering through the ruins, covered head to toe in tattoos, looking for his family. The world's technology is gone. Most plant life is gone. And everyone he meets is terrified of something called the 200, which nobody can describe and nobody has survived meeting. The episode is a parody of a post-apocalyptic teen drama, and there are Fallout references in the title card, and Principal Lewis has become a cannibal warlord who removes both of Greg's legs over the course of the story. It's a lot. The reveal is that the 200 are 200 of Roger's personas: Ricky Spanish, Dr. Penguin, the Legman, all of them walking around as separate physical individuals. And the cause of the apocalypse was Roger tagging along with a 6th grade school trip to Langley Quantum Labs, wandering into a Hadron Collider and getting himself irradiated, which split his personas off into independent existence and released a blast that took out most of the world. There's a freeze frame in the final battle that I only noticed on a rewatch, and it's the best joke in the episode. Standing among the 200 are Roger personas of the entire Smith family. These include Stan's rich country club member, Mr. Vanderhill, Francine's Korean kid who plays pool, Haley's sandal repairman, and Steve's crush, Elisha Wilkner. He has, at some point, for some reason, built and maintained disguises of the people he lives with. Everybody comments on it. It's just there, in the background, during a battle. Now, the fan theories, there are two that I think are worth the time. The first comes from a Reddit user going by Sexy Shafter, and it argues that the personas were never disguises to begin with. The theory is that they're a hive mind, that there is one central Roger who lives with the Smiths, and that the personas are simultaneously alive, elsewhere, all the time, going about their days. Which would explain how they hold down jobs and marriages that Roger clearly isn't physically present for. It would explain the prison sentences, and it would explain how Roger keeps surviving things that should kill him, because there's a fair bit of him distributed across the greater Langley Falls area at any given moment. The second theory, which floats around the TV Tropes archive, has a specific starting point. There's an episode called Roger and Me involving a best friend ritual, and by the end of it, Roger is carrying Stan's memories inside his head, along with his own, all with apparently perfect recall. The argument is that this is the moment the wheels came off. Roger was using disguises before this episode, but they behave like disguises. It's as the series progresses that they start developing lives he isn't aware of, and that he starts forgetting which ones are his. I quite like that one, because it does something a lot of theories don't, which is give you a specific before and after. You can go and watch it, and then there's the one that stays with me. There's an episode where Roger falls ill and can't keep up his rounds, and Langley Falls collapses. Not metaphorically. The town descends into widespread chaos and violence because the fake people stopped showing up, which means his invented identities aren't a hobby. They're load-bearing. The social cohesion of an entire town in Virginia depends on the continued good health of a 1600-year-old alien who cannot reliably remember who he's pretending to be. No notes. That's a genuinely brilliant piece of world building buried in a subplot. And that raises a question the show has never once bothered to answer. Why can nobody recognise him? I mean it. It's such an obvious problem that the show has clearly decided the only sane approach is to never bring it up. And I respect that enormously, but we've got 3 hours here, so we may as well. The disguises are a wig and some clothes. That's the whole apparatus. Occasionally, there'll be a bit of extra padding for weight, or some facial hair, or a few drawn-on wrinkles if he's playing someone older, but the skin stays grey. The face stays the wrong shape. The proportions stay entirely non-human. He's got no ears to speak of, his head is the wrong size for his body, and his eyes are enormous and black. He puts on a fedora, and people call him Sir. Now obviously, on one level, the answer is that it's a cartoon, and this is the joke. Fine. But American Dad is unusually diligent about its own internal rules, far more than its sibling show. And once you've established that a thing is possible in your world, people are going to ask why. So let's look at what we actually know. He has fooled the CIA, not once, and not passively. According to Roger himself, the agency has an entire floor of people whose job is finding him. He walks past those people. He has, at various points, been inside the building. He has interacted with Stan's colleagues. And nobody on that floor, whose entire professional existence is the recovery of an escaped Roswell alien, has ever looked at the grey creature in the wig and thought, hang on, he's also been in hospital multiple times. And this is the detail I find genuinely funny, because the show acknowledges it directly. Medical staff have commented on his anatomy. They've found it strange. They've remarked that his insides are not where insides are supposed to be. And then they have carried on treating him and sent him home. There is a doctor in Langley Falls who has looked inside a living alien and made a note about it. The Smith family are the exception, obviously. They know exactly what he is, and they recognise him through the costumes without effort. Except, and this is where it gets properly odd, they don't. Not entirely. Roger tells Steve at one point that every single member of the family has one persona they cannot identify as him. One each, a blind spot specific to the person. Steve's is a girl roughly his own age, who he played spin the bottle with at a party, which is a horrible thing to find out about yourself, and a very funny thing to be told casually by the person responsible. Francine's going by what people remember is a small Korean boy. So it isn't that familiarity makes you immune. It's that familiarity makes you immune to most of it, with one very specific gap that Roger knows about, and the family member doesn't. That, more than anything else, is what pushed people towards the theory that this is a power. The idea, which has been kicking about the fan community for years, is that Roger's species has a perception effect. Not a shapeshift, not a hologram, but something that works on the observer. When Roger decides that he is a man called Dimitri, everyone in the vicinity sees a man called Dimitri, because their minds have been quietly told to. The comparison people reach for is Superman, which is a fair one. The glasses have never made sense in that story either, and the accepted fan explanation there is roughly the same. It's not a disguise, it's a suggestion. The proximity clause covers the Smiths. Spend enough time in the presence of the effect and you build up a resistance, and the individual blind spots would be the last remaining foothold, the one persona per person that got in early enough to stick. And crucially, under this theory, it's not something Roger controls. He can't switch it on and off. It's just how his biology interacts with human perception, which is why he can't consciously use it to get out of trouble, and why it doesn't help him when the CIA actually has him locked in a cell. I find that theory very tidy, almost suspiciously tidy, which is usually the point at which I get nervous because, in my experience, the fan theories that make a show more coherent are the ones most likely to be wrong. Shows are messy, writers forget things. The neat explanation is usually the audience doing the writers a favour. But there is a piece of evidence sitting right there that the theory has to account for, and I think it's the most interesting thing in this whole section. Toshi. Toshi Yoshida is one of Steve's 3 friends. He speaks exclusively in Japanese, which nobody around him understands, and he has minimal contact with the Smith household beyond hanging around with Steve. And when Steve introduces him to a persona called Uncle Roger, Toshi immediately identifies him as an alien in a wig. No hesitation, no confusion. He looks at Roger and sees an alien wearing a hairpiece, which is precisely what Roger is. Under the perception theory, that shouldn't be possible. Toshi hasn't had the prolonged exposure. He's not an alien hunter. He's a teenager who plays video games in a basement, which spawned a small and rather lovely little theory, which is that Toshi has had a prior encounter with something. That at some point in his life, Toshi Yoshida saw something he wasn't supposed to see, and it left him with the ability to look straight through whatever Roger's doing. And there's an even smaller, sillier version, which is that Toshi is one himself. That he came down somewhere near Japan, or near where his adoptive family lived, picked up the local language on landing, and now chooses to speak Japanese, even though the rest of his family speaks English. I don't believe that one for a second, but I enjoy that it exists. Because here's the thing about Toshi's language, and this is confirmed canon rather than theory, so we can be firm about it. Toshi understands English perfectly. He follows every conversation. He responds appropriately. His mother speaks to him exclusively in English and has said outright that she can't understand him. Toshi has chosen not to speak English to his own mother. Throughout the entire run of the show, he has spoken at least some English. That's not a language barrier. That's a decision maintained over 20 years by a teenage boy, for reasons the show has never once explained. And people have suggested it's rebellion against a strict mother, or a rejection of his family's assimilation, or just a very long-running joke he's committed to. All plausible, none confirmed. Anyway, I've drifted a bit, but that's rather the point of these. There's one more angle on the recognition problem worth mentioning, and it's the least generous one. The alien hunter exception. The show has, on occasion, introduced people who specialise in this. Experts, and they can see him. Not easily and not immediately, but with enough concentration and enough will they can push through whatever's happening and clock what he is. Which fits the perception theory neatly, because that's exactly how you'd expect a psychic suggestion to behave. It's a default, not a wall. Most people accept it because most people have no reason not to. Someone actively looking for the seam can find the seam. And it also explains something about the Smiths that I think gets misread as stupidity. They're not blind to him. They're immune to him, which is a different thing, and it's the reason the household works. Roger can't run his effect on the 4 people he lives with. So with them, and only with them, he has to be himself. That's the trade. He gets a whole town he can be anyone in, and one house where he can't be anyone but Roger. I don't think the show would ever put it in those terms, but I think that's the shape of it. Since we're talking about his species, let's go a bit further out. Here's a production detail I think is genuinely charming. One of the most emotionally serious episodes American Dad ever made exists because Mike Barker went to a music festival and stood in the rain. Barker, who co-created the show, has talked about attending Bonnaroo in 2008 and watching My Morning Jacket play a 4-hour set in the wet, and coming away with the realization that he should be writing to music. He started using it as a generator, and he specifically credited a band called Wax Fang and a track of theirs called Majestic with producing the plot of the episode we're about to talk about. The episode is Lost in Space. Barker wrote it himself. It aired on the 5th of May, 2013, and the Wax Fang songs are in it, playing over the sequences they inspired, which is a lovely little closed loop. Fox promoted it as the show's 150th episode. It was actually the 151st, And the genuine 150th was an episode with the magnificent title The Full Cognitive Redaction of Avery Bullock by the coward Stan Smith. Fox also promoted Lost in Space as the episode that would finally reveal Roger's home planet. It doesn't. The setting is a spaceship belonging to Roger's species. We have still, to this day, never seen where he's from. Right. The story. Jeff Fisher, Hayley's husband, has been gone for a while at this point. He was thrown onto that ship by Roger in an earlier episode, and the show did not bring him straight back. He was genuinely absent, and the episodes in between kept quietly referencing it. On the ship, Jeff is a slave, and he's told that there's one way out. He has to prove to the Emperor of Roger's species that his love for Hayley is real. The proof is administered by a machine called the Majestic, which pulls up his memories and displays them. He's helped through this by a fellow slave, who is Sinbad, the comedian, playing himself. Sinbad, who is a much better actor than he ever got credit for, delivers a warning that the price of failure is losing his privates, as Sinbad had already done. Jeff goes through with it, and the Majestic shows the room a parade of him being selfish, childish, thoughtless, and a bad husband. Every memory it selects makes him look worse. He fails. Except he doesn't. And this is where the episode turns into something else. Jeff works out that the machine only showed bad memories. He confronts it, and the Majestic admits that it was ordered to do that. It was ordered to only ever show the worst by the Emperor, after the Emperor's own heart was broken. The Emperor is called Zing. He's voiced by Michael McKean, who plays him with this brittle, wounded grandeur that I think is one of the best guest performances the show has ever had. And the love that broke him was Roger. Roger and Zing were together. Roger cheated on him. Not discreetly, not accidentally, but openly, making out with a human male directly in front of him. Zing responded by declaring war on the concept of love for an entire civilization. He rigged the machine so that no member of his species would ever again be shown evidence that love was real, because he had decided it wasn't, because of one bad night with a man who is now living in a suburban attic in Virginia, getting drunk in front of soap operas. The Majestic eventually reveals all of this to the room, and Roger's people, who have apparently spent years being told love doesn't exist by a heartbroken monarch, revolt. Most of them turn on him. Only his personal guard stays loyal. I want to sit with what that reframes because I think it's substantial. We already know Roger was told he was the decider and was actually a crash test dummy. What we didn't know until this episode is that the person who almost certainly authorized that mission was his ex. Think about the timing. Roger humiliates the Emperor. Shortly thereafter, Roger is loaded into a vessel, told an enormous flattering lie about his cosmic importance, and fired at a distant planet in a test that the ship was expected not to survive. That's not a science program. That's a man with unlimited power getting rid of someone and dressing it up as policy. And it means Roger's entire life on Earth, every persona, every scheme, every terrible thing he's done in Langley Falls, for the better part of 80 years, exists because he cheated on a boyfriend in space, and the boyfriend had a fleet. The show does not say this out loud. It gives you the pieces in 2 episodes, several seasons apart, and lets you assemble it. That is, I think, an unusually confident bit of writing for a network cartoon. There's another thing Lost in Space does, which I think is more important than the Zing revelation, and it's this: Roger's people are not monsters. We've been told by Roger that his species has to be cruel or they die. We've watched Roger behave accordingly for years. And then we get an episode set among a whole population of them, and what we find is a group of beings capable of genuine love, capable of empathy, and capable of overthrowing a tyrant when they find out he's been lying to them about the nature of feeling. They're fine. They're not great. They're running a slave ship I'm not going to pretend they're saints, but they're recognisably people. Which supports a theory I've always been fond of, and it's one of the older ones in the fan community. The argument goes like this: a species that biologically requires cruelty could not build a civilization. It couldn't invent agriculture, let alone interstellar travel. Any population where everyone is Roger dies out in a generation. So if his people are out there flying ships around, they must overwhelmingly be functional, cooperative, decent individuals who keep their unpleasantness within manageable limits, which would make Roger not the norm. It would make him an outlier, the recessive result, the worst person on an otherwise perfectly reasonable planet. And under that reading, the whole mission takes on one more layer because it stops being purely personal. Zing might have wanted rid of Roger specifically, but a society that produces the occasional Roger would also want a mechanism for exporting them. Package the problem individuals as crash test dummies, tell them they're chosen, and send them somewhere very far away. Roger might not be the only one. He might be the only one we've met. Now, the sad part, and it's a production sad rather than a story sad. At Comic-Con in July 2013, a couple of months after Lost in Space aired, Mike Barker announced that there were plans for an American Dad film. It would centre on Roger. It would be set on his birth planet, and he suggested it was already partially written. 4 months later, in November 2013, Barker left the show. The project went quiet. And in August 2022, Matt Weitzman confirmed that plans for a feature film had been scrapped. So the planet is, in all likelihood, gone. Not just unshown, but permanently unshowable. Because the version of the show that was going to show it left the building over a decade ago, along with the man who wanted to write it. I find that genuinely a shame. Not because I think the film would necessarily have been brilliant. Films made out of long-running animated sitcoms have a patchy record at best. But because there's an unusual thing happening in American Dad, where the most developed piece of lore in the entire series is a place we're never going to see, attached to a character who could go back any time he wanted. Which is the last detail, and it might be the most important one in this whole section. In Naked to the Limit One More Time, the episode where Jeff gets abducted in the first place, it's established that Roger can summon his people's ship. He can call for a lift home whenever he likes. That's how Jeff ends up on it. Roger triggered the pickup. Roger is not stranded. Roger has never been stranded. He has been on Earth since crashing in Roswell in 1947, which means every complaint he's ever made about being stuck in that attic, every bit of self-pity about the indignity of living with humans, is theatre. He has a ride, he's just not taking it. Whether that's because there's an emperor waiting for him at the other end, or because he genuinely prefers the Smiths and can't say so, is a question the show has very deliberately left alone. I know which one I think it is. Now, the other non-human in that house has an even stranger situation. A man's brain is inside a goldfish because the CIA didn't want East Germany to win a skiing event. That's it. That's the premise. And I want to say it as plainly as possible because I think familiarity has sanded the edges off it. If you'd never seen this show and someone described the goldfish to you, you'd assume they were exaggerating. Klaus Heisler was an East German Olympic ski jumper. At the 1986 Winter Olympics, the Central Intelligence Agency transferred his mind into the body of a goldfish, specifically to stop him taking gold. Stan performed the procedure, and Klaus has mostly been in the bowl ever since. The trick they were nervous about, the one he never got to land, is called Dar Flippity Flop. There's a casting detail here I've always liked. Klaus was written as French. That was the plan. D. Bradley Baker came into audition, and for whatever reason, did the whole thing in a German accent instead. They cast him on the spot and rewrote the character around the voice, which means one of the most distinctive things about this show the fish with the East German backstory, and all the Cold War material that flows out of it exists because an actor made a decision in a booth. Klaus also has a legal American name, which is one of those details that only exists because a writer thought it was funny, and then it stuck. He is, on paper, Ace McNasty. Now the episode. It's the season 9 finale. It's called Dar Flippity Flop after the trick, and it's the closest this show has come to giving Klaus what he wants. He finds out his original human body still exists. The CIA has it, frozen, in storage, has had it the whole time. Stan works for the CIA. Stan has always known where it was. Klaus is, understandably, beside himself. Decades of being a novelty pet in a house full of people who barely register him, and the way out has been sitting in a freezer at his owner's place of work. They get it out, and it's rotting. The body is not usable. It's been sitting there too long, or it wasn't stored properly, or nobody cared enough to maintain it, which frankly is the most plausible explanation, given how the agency treats everything else in this show. Whatever the reason, the answer is no. Klaus cannot have his life back. He was shown it, and then it was taken away in the same episode. And what he does with that is, I'd argue, entirely reasonable. He knocks Stan out and puts himself into Stan's body. Stan spends much of the episode as a goldfish, panicking, while Klaus walks around in a human body for the first time in decades and immediately starts wrecking it. And the show plays it as a comedy about Stan trying to get his own body back, which it is, but there's a version of that episode where the exact same events are a tragedy about a man taking the only thing he was ever offered. The show sides with Stan. Obviously it sides with Stan. He's the title character. But I've never been entirely convinced by that. Now the parallel that fans have chewed on for years, and I think it's the most productive way into Klaus as a character. Reginald. Reginald is a koala with a human brain in it. Same procedure, same agency, same basic situation. He turned up during one of Hayley's breakups with Jeff, and they dated for a while. And Reggie is fine, better than fine. He's a CIA agent with a good job. He's got money, he's confident, he does well with women, and he seems entirely at peace with being a koala. The obvious first theory is that he's simply newer to it, and that the madness will arrive in time. Klaus was fished in 1986. Reggie hasn't had the decades yet. Under that reading, we're watching the same slow collapse at two different points on the timeline, and one day Reginald will be as bitter as Klaus is, which puts everything charming about him in a fairly grim light. But there's a second version that I think is much better, and it's the one that reframes Klaus entirely. Before the procedure, Reginald was homeless. He had nothing. The koala body gave him a career, an income, and a life he could not have had otherwise. So of course he's happy. Being a koala is the best thing that ever happened to him. Klaus was an Olympian. He was days from the moment his entire life had been building towards, and it was taken deliberately by a foreign government for a reason so trivial that nobody involved has ever apologised for it, which means the misery isn't about the body at all. It never was. Reggie and Klaus are in comparable physical situations, and one of them is delighted. The difference is entirely what they were interrupted from. Klaus isn't sad because he's a fish. He's sad because he was somebody, and then he wasn't, and the man who did it feeds him. There's a related theory that Klaus's continued attachment to the Smith family is Stockholm Syndrome, and honestly, I struggle to argue with it. He's kept by them. He's mistreated by them. Roger has at one point smashed his bowl against a wall and walked out of the room while Klaus lay gasping on the carpet, and the show does not treat that as a big moment. And still, most of the time the family is genuinely in trouble. Klaus is the one warning them. He tried to warn Stan about Francine's birth parents. Nobody listened. He was right. And that's the other thing about Klaus that I think gets lost, because the show forgot it for a while. In the later Fox seasons, Klaus was arguably the smartest and most reasonable person in that house. He was the one with perspective. He was the one who could see what was coming. The show even lampshades why nobody listens. The family can't hold on to the fact that he's a man in a fish's body. They know it, they've been told, it's the whole premise. But functionally, they treat him as a talking goldfish, because that's easier, and a goldfish's opinion doesn't require action. He is a person that everyone around him has quietly agreed to file as a pet. Then the show moved to cable, and Klaus became a bro. I'm not being unfair here, it's a well-documented drift. In the TBS era, Klaus increasingly reads as a stereotype of bro culture, fully signed up to whatever deranged thing the family's doing that week, rather than standing outside it. And I understand the writing logic, because a character whose entire function is to be right and ignored has a limited shelf life. But something went out of the show when the fish stopped being the only sane voice in the building. Now, the theory. And this is the one that reaches furthest, so hold it loosely. There's a long-running fan reading, which we'll get into properly in a bit, that the whole series is a virtual environment being run on Stan. And under that reading, Klaus is the real Stan. The argument is that Klaus occupies the position of the household punching bag, and that this reflects how the system actually regards the man it's running the simulation on. The German accent is there to needle Stan's prejudices, which is the sort of small cruelty this show's version of the CIA would absolutely build into a program. And the Stan we watch every week is the flattering avatar, the version of himself the experiment lets him inhabit. It's a lot. I don't buy it as literal truth, but I do think there's something real underneath it, which is that Klaus is the character in that house who is most obviously being punished for something, and the show has told us he was turned into a goldfish by the CIA to stop him from winning Olympic gold. Here's the last detail, and it's the one that keeps the door open. Klaus has been shown in a glimpse of the future in a human body. Not his original one, just a human body. Alive, upright, walking around at some point down the line. The show has never explained how he gets there. It's one image in an episode about something else. And the writers on this show do love a callback, sometimes years later, sometimes to things you'd assumed were throwaways. So somewhere in the possible future of this series, Klaus Heisler gets out of the bowl. Whether they'll ever actually do it now is anyone's guess, but it's sitting there, which is more than Klaus has had for most of his life. And speaking of things the CIA has done to people in this show, the house keeps growing rooms. That's the bit I want to start with, because it's the thing that started this whole line of theorising in the first place, and it's easy to miss if you're watching casually. The Smiths live on Cherry Street in Langley Falls, Virginia. The town is fictional, and the name is stitched together from two real places. Langley, which is where the CIA actually is, and Great Falls, which is the pleasant commuter suburb next door. So the show is telling you exactly what kind of town this is before a single character opens their mouth. It's where the agency lives when it goes home. The house itself is a normal two-story suburban place with a basement and an attic, except it isn't, because every so often an episode will reveal a room that has no business existing. There's an episode called The Missing Kink that shows the house containing an entire underworld, a subterranean space where various friends and acquaintances of the Smiths are apparently down there partying. Not a basement, an underworld. It appears once and is never referenced again. There's the episode with the outstanding title, The Full Cognitive Redaction of Avery Bullock by the Coward Stan Smith, which reveals that Stan has a secret control room buried in the ground beside the house. The door on top is camouflaged with the surrounding grass. You get in by extending your arm at the lawn, at which point a handprint reader rises up out of the earth. Inside, it's full of extremely advanced equipment. There's Of Ice and Men, which shows a large habitat inside the property. There's a scene where Steve and Klaus play one-on-one basketball, and the score is somewhere around 11-10, which raises the separate question of how a goldfish is holding a man to a single point. Each of these appears exactly once. None of them are mentioned again. The house is not a set, it's a mood. Now, individually, those are surrealist gags, American Dad does a lot of those, and the writers have been open about it. The show will occasionally abandon its own plot mid-episode to follow strangers, or to check in on a bird with a drug problem that Francine can inexplicably understand. That's a real thing that happens in The Missing Kink. It's not a dream sequence, it just occurs. But if you're the sort of person who wants the rooms to mean something, there's a framework waiting for you. Let's talk about the goo. There's an episode called The Vacation Goo. Francine is frustrated that she can't get everyone together. Stan proposes a holiday, and the family have a genuinely lovely time in Maui. And then Roger shuts down a machine, and the family wake up in tanks in the basement. Stan has been putting them in simulation chambers and programming fake holidays every year. For years, they have memories of trips they never took. Francine has been unknowingly experiencing a marriage in which the good bits were generated. She's furious, obviously, and demands a real holiday. They go skiing. Then they go to Italy. And it's revealed that both of those were also the goo, programmed by Steve and then by Haley respectively, because the kids like the tanks. Now here's the fan reading, and it's one I've come round to. The final holiday, the one the episode presents as genuinely real, isn't. Look at what's in it. Francine jumps overboard because she believes they're still in the goo and expects to wake up at home, and survives a fall she absolutely should not have survived. She's then found clinging to a floating tree branch in the middle of the ocean, where tree branches famously are, and Steve has a girlfriend, which the show itself flags as implausible by having Francine comment on it. Under that reading, the whole episode is Stan running a very long con to get his family to accept the goo. And it works. They agree the tanks are better, which is, when you say it out loud, one of the darkest resolutions this show has ever produced. And it's in an episode about a holiday. Now, memory. Because the CIA in this show wipes memories constantly, and it's treated as ordinary administrative procedure. Stan gets wiped, Haley gets wiped, Bullock is supposed to get wiped, in an episode that has the word redaction in the title. It's not a special event, it's paperwork. And the implication that runs underneath the whole series is that any given character's understanding of their own history is only as reliable as the last time someone at the agency decided it needed adjusting. Then there's virtual insanity, which introduces CIA avatars, physical bodies operated remotely by agents. And in the middle of that, Avery Bullock casually admits that one of his avatars is a baby and that he uses it for personal reasons. He does not elaborate. Nobody asks, hold that thought, because we're coming back to it in a bit, and it goes somewhere genuinely daft. So, the theory, the version archived on TV Tropes, goes like this. American Dad is a virtual world experiment being run on Stan Smith by the CIA. He either volunteered or he was put in it. Bullock is the administrator, which is why he has that particular flavour of amused detachment about everything that happens. And the cast are components. Francine is the ideal wife, constructed to specification. Haley is an ideological opposite built to give him friction. Roger is Stan's ID, running loose in the environment and generating the chaos that the program can't. And Klaus, as we touched on, is the real man in the tank. What I find compelling about that framework isn't that I think it's true. It's what it does with the episodes that don't fit anywhere else. American Dad has a fair few of those. Episodes where the world's rules just stop. Episodes with endings that don't connect to anything. The theory absorbs all of it, as technicians getting bored and messing with the settings. There's a second theory that runs alongside it, and I think it's more fun. Stan is a series of clones. The show has established that the CIA does cloning. There was a Stan clone called Bill, who was a failure, mostly because he couldn't hold the voice convincingly. But Bill was a beta. There would be better ones. Under this theory, there's a copy of Stan's consciousness on a hard drive somewhere at Langley, and every time Stan dies or gets too damaged or wanders off, a fresh one gets loaded and sent home, which would explain the inconsistency in his beliefs from episode to episode, because it isn't the same man. Some of these Stans like pop music, some don't, some are more religious than others, some are considerably crueler, and the original Stan might be dead or deep undercover, or he might have simply decided to leave and arranged this so his family never had to go through a divorce. I've got no evidence for any of that beyond the show's own established capabilities. But I'll say this for it, it's a cleaner explanation for Stan's total inability to retain a lesson than the usual one, which is that he's an idiot. He isn't an idiot. He's a highly competent field agent and weapons expert who's been doing this job since the 80s. The gap between how good he is at work and how catastrophically he handles a Tuesday at home is one of the genuine oddities of this show. And then there's the episode that makes all of this worse, and it's a Christmas one. It's called Dreaming of a White Porsche Christmas, and in it, it is established that the Smith family we have been watching is a punishment. Stan has been assigned to Klaus. His real family, the one he's supposed to have, is shown, and it's much closer to what he'd claimed to want. Ordered, compliant, agreeable. The point of the punishment family is to make him appreciate the real one. He prefers the punishment family. Now, the show does not do anything with that. It's an episode, it happens, and then we're mostly back to normal, aside from a few storylines that keep going, but somebody in that writer's room established in canon that Stan's family is a punishment applied to one man, and that he eventually chooses it over his original family. There's a reading of that which is genuinely sweet, which is that Stan, given a choice between the family he thinks he wants and the shambles he's actually got, picks the shambles. That's a decent thing to say about a person. There's another reading where you notice that the show established early and repeatedly that Stan was assigned to look after Klaus, and it sits alongside the goo, the clones, the memory wipes, and the house that generates rooms. And it starts to feel less like a joke and more like a pattern. I'll say what I actually think, which is that none of these theories are true, because there's no unified answer being withheld. What's true is that this show established, early and repeatedly, that reality in Langley Falls is a thing that can be edited by people with clearance, and once you've done that, the audience is going to keep asking who's holding the pen. That's not a mystery the writers planted. It's a mystery the premise generates on its own. But there's one episode that people build a much bigger theory out of. The second act break in this episode is the best thing American Dad has ever done. And I'll take arguments on that, but I won't lose them. The episode is Rapture's Delight. It aired in December 2009, written by Chris and Matt McKenna, directed by Joe Daniello, and it opens as an entirely standard Christmas episode about Stan being annoyed. The family are late for the Christmas service. Stan can't find parking because it's Christmas, and the church is full of people he considers lesser Christians who only turn up twice a year. By the time they get inside, there's nowhere to sit. He's fuming, and Francine, trying to defuse it, decides to give him his Christmas present early and takes him into the janitor's cupboard. They come out. The church is silent. Everyone's clothes are on the pews. The rapture has happened, and Stan missed it because he was having sex in a cupboard. Now the show being what it is, it takes a moment to enjoy the details. Steve and Hayley have gone up, and we follow them through processing, where it's explained that everyone gets a personalised heaven. One door swings open, and behind it is a beautiful virgin riding a unicorn that produces pepper jack cheeseburgers. That's Steve's, of course it is. Meanwhile, Stan is doing what Stan does, which is refusing to accept the situation and blaming his wife for it. He decides that if he can just find Jesus, he can get this overturned on appeal. He finds a fake one first. Francine finds the real one in a diner, and they get on. And Stan is so relentlessly awful about being left behind that Francine leaves him for Jesus, who in fairness to her seems lovely. Then the adverts break, and when we come back, It's 7 years later. The world is gone. Global war has flattened everything. The animation shifts into something genuinely nasty, all wreckage and smoke, and it manages to be frightening while still being drawn in the same clean, simple, bright style as the rest of the show, which is a very hard trick to pull off. Stan is a scarred, bitter CIA agent walking the ruins. Steve's lost an arm somewhere along the way. He's not funny anymore. Francine has married Jesus, and she's been captured by the Antichrist, who is voiced by Andy Samberg. Jesus comes to find Stan and asks for help. Stan agrees on the condition that he gets sent to heaven afterwards, which is such a perfect Stan negotiation that I laughed out loud the first time. They fight their way in. Along the way, Stan shoots a child in the head, having asked Jesus what the Antichrist looks like, and been told he'd know him when he saw him. It turns out to be a boy from a nearby prep school who sometimes comes into play. Jesus is appalled. Stan is not especially bothered. And at the end, in the lair, Francine tears open Stan's shirt to look at a wound and finds that he has been carrying their wedding rings the whole time. 7 years of hell, and he kept the rings. Then he sets off a bomb to end the war and save Jesus, and he dies in the blast. Stan Smith dies, on screen, in a Christmas episode. He goes to heaven, and Michelle takes him to his personalised one, and he opens the door, and it's his house, exactly as it was at the start of the episode. Same living room, same sofa, same family, with one difference. Klaus is stuffed and mounted on a plaque on the wall. Right, let's talk about the theory, because it's been documented at length, and it's the biggest fan theory this show has. The argument is simple. Everything after Rapture's delight takes place inside Stan's personalised heaven. He died. He was given a world built to his specifications, indistinguishable from the one he left, and the show never came back out of it. Every episode since December 2009 has been happening inside a construct, and the evidence people point to is the drift. The show got stranger after this, more surreal, more elastic, more willing to break its own physics. Consequences soften. Deaths become negotiable. The world bends to accommodate whatever Stan is doing that week, which, if you're in a heaven built for one man, is exactly what you'd expect. It's not that reality got looser, it's that reality is now a service. But the detail everyone comes back to, and the reason this theory has legs at all, is the fish. Stan was given a perfect world. He could have had anything, and out of all the things he could have edited about his life, the single change he made was to have Klaus killed, taxidermied, and hung on the wall as a trophy. That's such a small, petty, revealing thing to want. It's not a fantasy, it's a grudge. And it tells you something about the man that 100 episodes of shouting never quite did, which is that Stan's idea of perfection isn't paradise. It's his own ordinary life, unchanged, with one specific irritation removed and displayed. Now, I have to be honest about the other side of this, because I think the theory is better as a lens than as a claim. Klaus is obviously alive afterwards. He's in the opening titles, he's in most episodes, so either the heaven quietly restored him, which undermines the entire piece of evidence the theory rests on, or the episode isn't binding. And the second one is almost certainly correct, because American Dad treats its Christmas episodes as their own thing. They're a loose parallel continuity where Santa can become a recurring military antagonist and Stan's father can fuse with Krampus. The show does maintain continuity more than people give it credit for, but the Christmas specials are where it lets itself off the lead. So no, I don't think Stan has been dead since 2009 in any way the writers would endorse. But I'd defend the theory anyway, for one reason. It's doing something that good fan theories do and bad ones don't, which is that it takes a real observation about the show and finds an explanation for it. The observation is correct. American Dad genuinely did get looser and stranger after around this point. Something did change. The theory is wrong about the cause, but it's right that there's a cause. And the real cause, which we'll get to properly at the end, is a set of production decisions involving a network, a showrunner, and a move to cable, which is a much less interesting answer than heaven, and considerably less fun to talk about at 1 a.m. One more thing about Rapture's delight, because I think it deserves the credit. The religious jokes in it are clever rather than cruel. That's rare. Comedy about religion tends to default to sneering, and the audience is trained to laugh at the target rather than at the joke. This episode doesn't do that. It's Jesus is a decent bloke in a bad situation who is genuinely better for Francine than Stan is. The Antichrist is a career-focused nuisance, and the person who comes off worst by an enormous margin is the devout Christian who spends the apocalypse fighting the Antichrist alongside Jesus. That's a much harder episode to write than the sneering version, and I don't think the show got enough credit for it at the time. Here's something smaller that runs through the whole series and gets almost no attention. In an early episode called Homeland Insecurity, Roger produces a solid gold, jewel-encrusted turd. It's a throwaway. It's the kind of gag this show does constantly. A piece of alien biology introduced for one laugh and then dropped, except the camera doesn't drop it. The camera follows it, and it abandons the Smiths to do so. That's the thing about the golden turd that I don't think gets said enough. The show doesn't just introduce a cursed object, it changes format to accommodate it. Mid-episode, without warning, American Dad stops being about the Smith family and becomes an anthology about strangers who happen to be holding a piece of alien excrement, and then it comes back and carries on as if nothing happened. And then it did it again. Across seasons, over years. Whenever the mood took them, the show would find the turd and follow it for a few minutes into somebody else's life. There's an anthology series buried inside this sitcom, and most people who watch the show couldn't tell you it exists. Let me go through what actually happens to the people who hold it, because the pattern is the thing. A man beats his best friend to death over it. Not in a fight, not in self-defense. He kills him for a share of what the thing might be worth. And then the guilt of what he's done is so total that he takes his own life. A police officer, a career honest man, weeks away from retirement, steals it from the crash scene before it ever reaches the evidence locker. This is someone who has spent decades not doing that. Decades. And he throws all of it away with a fortnight to go. A woman poisons her husband. His crime was that he had decided to hand it back and clear his conscience. She killed him to stop him being a good person. And in a later episode called Blagsnast, a Love Story, there's a man who comes into possession of it. And the detail here is the one that got me. Before he finds it, he sees someone get hurt and a little girl crying, and he's on his way out to help. He's a decent kid. He's in motion, going to do the right thing. Then he has the turd, and he walks past them. He also, shortly afterwards, starts making a deal with a man he'd already decided he didn't want to deal with. So here's the theory, and it's one of the older ones in the fan community. The golden turd is not a MacGuffin. It's cursed. It affects the minds of the people who hold it. And the argument for that rests entirely on the speed, because you could explain any single one of those stories as greed. Greed makes people do appalling things, and gold is worth a lot of money, and none of this requires the supernatural. Fine, but look at how fast it happens. These aren't slow slides into corruption. There is a clear arc of gradual corruption. Someone picks it up, and within what appears to be a very short window, they are a murderer. An honest man does not lose 30 years of integrity in an afternoon, unless something is helping. And the small detail that pushes me over the line is the boy. Because the boy isn't going for the money in that moment. He's not scheming. He's just walking past a crying child he was about to help. That's not greed, that's an absence. Something in him switched off. Now the counter-argument is one that gets raised in the same discussions, and I think it's fair, so I'll give it properly. The counter-argument is money, dear boy, which is to say, The writers wanted a recurring bit that could generate self-contained crime stories at will. And greed is the simplest engine for that. And no curse is required. Every one of these stories works as a story about people being awful about gold. I still don't think the timing holds up, but I'll admit I want the curse to be real, because it's a better show if it is. There's one more thing that happens to this object, and it's genuinely strange. After the apocalypse, it becomes an object of religious reverence. That's it. That's all we get. In the ruined future, people worship it, which, if you're inclined to be generous, closes the loop rather beautifully. An object that corrupts everyone it touches, that has personally caused multiple deaths, ends up as a sacred relic in the world that comes after. Nobody left alive knows what it did. They just know it's gold, and it survived, and everything else didn't. I've always found that more effective than anything the show ever did with it directly. The turd outlives civilization and gets promoted. Let me say the obvious thing about all this, which is that the golden turd is, structurally, the best idea American Dad ever had. Think about what it gives you. A device that lets the show tell any story it likes, about anyone it likes, anywhere it likes, with no setup required, and a built-in reason for those stories to be dark. You can do a noir, you can do a domestic thriller, you can do a 5-minute character study of a man in a car park having the worst day of his life. And you can drop any of them into the middle of an episode about Stan buying a jet ski. Most shows would have built a season around that. American Dad used it as background texture, and then went back to whatever it was doing. And I think that's genuinely characteristic of this show in a way that's worth naming, because it comes up again and again. American Dad is not precious about its own good ideas. It will build something with real weight, use it for 4 minutes, and put it down. Family Guy would have made the golden turd a recurring character with its own catchphrase. American Dad made it a haunting and then wandered off. There's a thread you can pull here about the show's relationship with attention. This is the MacFarlane series that was always the second one. It never had the merchandising, it never had the cultural conversation, it got moved around schedules and cancelled and picked up and moved again. And I've wondered occasionally whether that's why it's so relaxed about its own material. When nobody's watching that closely, you can put a piece of good writing in the background and not have to explain it to anyone. Whether that's true, or whether I'm reading a production circumstance as an artistic temperament, I couldn't tell you. But the golden turd sitting there, mostly unremarked, doing the work of a limited series inside a sitcom, feels like evidence for something. No notes on any of it. It's the best thing in the show, and it's barely in the show. Now let's talk about the family itself, because a lot of what people argue about comes from what got established early, and then quietly changed. 2 sets of parents, opposite outcomes, and I think you learn more about this show from comparing them than from almost anything else in it. Francine first, because her backstory is buried across multiple episodes spread over a decade, and when you put it in order, it's genuinely one of the grimmest character histories in mainstream animation. Francine was born Francine Dawson to Nicholas and Cassandra Dawson of Hilton Head, South Carolina. That's a wealthy address, and they are wealthy people. They gave her up so they could keep flying first class. That's not an interpretation. That's what happens. In an episode called Big Trouble in Little Langley, Stan goes looking for her birth parents and finds them, and at first they're charming. They're everything he'd want in an in-law, and then it comes out, casually, in the middle of a pleasant conversation, that they abandoned their toddler because children weren't allowed in first class at the time, and they didn't want to move back. They weighed a child against a seat, and the seat won. And the reason? We know they meant it, is what happens next. The Smith house catches fire with Stan inside, and the Dawsons leave him in it. Stan, to his credit, and there aren't many places in this show where you can say that, without a caveat, decides not to introduce them to Francine. He sends them away. She never finds out they were in the house, and he goes and encourages her to make up with the parents who actually raised her. That's a decent thing. Quietly done, no credit taken. I think it's the best Stan has ever been. But it does mean Francine spent years not knowing, which is its own kind of thing. Before the Lings, she was in an orphanage, and the show has been specific about what that was like. In an episode called Office Spaceman, it comes out that the place she was raised treated left-handedness as demonic. She's left-handed, and whenever she used her left hand on a Friday, she was struck with a piece of beef or a mackerel. I want to be clear that I'm not making that up. Beef or a mackerel, depending on availability, for the sin of writing with the wrong hand, in a Catholic orphanage in the United States in the 1960s and 70s. The show delivers it as a one-line gag in a subplot. It is very funny, and it is also a fairly detailed account of institutional child abuse. At 7, she was adopted by Ma and Ba Ling, and here's the comparison I mentioned at the top. Because the Lings are wonderful, they're intrusive, they take over the house whenever they visit. Ba has to constantly correct Stan on the pronunciation of his name, and they are unambiguously loving parents who wanted her. They visited her every day until they could afford to adopt her. Every day. For however long it took to get the money together. That's the detail the show slips in, and it's doing something very deliberate because it sits directly against the Dawsons, who gave her away over a plane ticket. Francine also has an adoptive sister, Gwen, who Stan finds extremely attractive and mentions every single time she comes up, which is exactly the sort of low-grade domestic awfulness this show is best at. Now, the Dawsons come back, and it gets worse. In an episode called Family Plan, Francine decides she wants a bigger family, gets the number from the adoption agency herself, and is invited to a reunion by Nicholas. She arrives to find that her birth mother is dead. Cassandra took her own life sometime before, so Francine's one chance to meet the woman who gave her up was missed by a margin she had no way of knowing about, and the way she finds out is by turning up to a party. She's then accused by a cousin of being a gold digger who's turned up to cash in, and the reunion ends with Nicholas losing his temper about everyone using their own phone data plans instead of the house network, and instituting a fight to the death among his heirs, with the family fortune going to whoever survives. That's the family she came from, a man who will kill his own children over a broadband dispute, and a woman who couldn't stay. I've always thought the show is remarkably clear-eyed about Francine, actually. She's written as a slightly ditzy suburban housewife, and the fan reading is usually that she's dim. But when you assemble the history, what you've got is a person who was discarded by wealth, institutionally abused, and then rescued at 7 by people who genuinely loved her, and who has grown up to be relentlessly cheerful about a marriage that would exhaust anybody. That's not stupidity, that's a survival posture, which brings me to the theory, and it's a good one. The argument is that Francine's ditziness is deliberate, that she's playing it, and the evidence people cite is that when the show actually needs her to be competent, she is, at a level that doesn't match the rest of her characterization. There's an episode called Stan Time that gets referenced a lot for this. She has moments of tactical thinking that come from nowhere and then disappear again. Some versions of the theory push it further and suggest she's a plant, that her adoptive parents trained her, that marrying a CIA agent is both perfect cover and perfect access, and that over the years she's come to genuinely care about her family. But the original purpose hasn't gone anywhere, and the loose thread people hang it on is a line from a version of Stan who turns up from the future, who mentions that the last time he saw Francine, she was in the electric chair. Now, that's a gag. I think that's a gag, but it's a very specific gag to make about a housewife. Right, Stan's side. Stan's father is Jack Smith, and Stan grew up worshipping him. The worship is the important part because it was built on nothing. Jack was absent, and in an episode called Con Air, it comes out that he wasn't off doing anything noble. He was a jewel thief. He stole from family members and framed them for it. He ignored Stan so completely that Stan never learned to ride a bike, which is the sort of a small, precise detail that lands harder than the big stuff. And Stan's response to being abandoned, which I think is the most revealing thing about him in the entire series, was to hire someone to impersonate his father for 20 years. He couldn't say the words, so he paid an actor to be his dad at family occasions for 2 decades, rather than admit to his wife and children that he'd been left. The truth only comes out because the impersonator dies and the real Jack turns up at the funeral. That's an enormous amount of sustained effort to avoid one conversation. His mother is Betty, and the show handles her with an unusual amount of care given that it's mostly making jokes. Betty didn't abandon him, she did something else. She made an 11-year-old fill the role of provider. She leaned on him as a partner rather than racing him as a child. And then, when she started dating again, she largely set him aside. The relationship in the present is uncomfortable, and the show is specific about who's driving that. It's not Betty being a smothering mother. It's Stan, who is a grown man with an unhealthy fixation on his mum's happiness, because he was assigned that job at 11 and nobody ever told him he could stop. And there's one more thing about Stan's childhood that the show mentions almost in passing in an episode about a restaurant of all places, which is that he was molested by his priest. It goes by in a line, it's not dwelt on, and it's simply there in the canon. I bring it up not to be grim for the sake of it, but because it's part of a pattern I find genuinely interesting about this show. American Dad will establish something devastating about a character, deliver it as a joke, and then decline to build an episode around it. There's no very special episode, there's no arc, it's just now true. You could read that as callousness. I read it as a fairly accurate model of how people actually carry this stuff, which is not in dedicated episodes, but as background information about themselves that occasionally comes up. Jack, incidentally, later fuses with crampoos, which is a sentence I'm going to leave exactly where it is. Now Hayley, briefly, because there's a theory about her that I think is the best character theory in the show. Hayley is written as a left-wing activist whose politics exist mainly to annoy her father. The show itself got bored of that fairly quickly, and Matt Weitzman has said as much, that the political banter between Stan and Hayley had a limited shelf life, and they moved away from it because it would have got boring. But the theory asks a better question, which is where the politics came from in the first place. Because Hayley was a daddy's girl as a small child. That's established. She adored him. And what changed it was that Stan tried to condition her into being an assassin, so the two of them could work together. Under the theory, everything Hayley became is a response to that. She didn't drift into her politics. She engineered herself into the precise shape her father would find most objectionable, as the only available form of retaliation against a man who tried to turn her into a weapon, which would make her the most Stan-like person in the family. Same total commitment, same inability to do anything by halves, aimed in the opposite direction. There's also a long-running question about whether Stan is even her biological father, which the show has flirted with. And this is the one place where I'll be firm, because the genetics actually settle it. Black hair is not a single dominant trait. Francine's natural colour is brown. Stan's hair is black. Hayley's hair is black. The other candidate's main resemblance to her is a headband. She's his. I'm afraid the maths is on Stan's side. And that brings us round to the two youngest people in that house. Mike Barker said something about continuity once that I think explains the entire difference between this show and its sibling, and he said it very plainly. The gist was that they try to obey basic rules of continuity. If a character takes a big step, like getting married, they don't undo it. And the reason isn't sentiment, it's mechanics. If the audience knows that changes get reversed, then no change ever carries weight. Every big story beat becomes a thing you sit through until the reset. Whereas if the audience knows they'll be living with it, the beat has power. because it's going to last. That's a completely different philosophy from the show, where nothing sticks, and it's why American Dad can do things Family Guy structurally can't. And the proof of it is the Jeff arc, which I think is the single most impressive piece of long-form storytelling this show ever attempted. Let me lay it out in order, because it's spread across 3 seasons, and a lot of people who watched it live never saw it assembled. It starts with Naked to the Limit one more time. Jeff finds out Roger is an alien, and Roger, dealing with this in the way Roger deals with everything, throws him into the spaceship. Jeff is gone. Not gone for the rest of the episode. Gone, he is not in the show anymore. And this is the bit that impresses me, because the episodes in between don't ignore it. They keep touching it. In Spelling Bee My Baby, Haley is still holding out hope he's coming back. There's an episode where Stan and Roger try to accelerate her grieving process. Not out of compassion, but because they need her to referee a tennis match, and her being sad is inconvenient. That's a genuinely nasty joke, and it only works because the loss is real. Then we get Lost in Space, which we covered earlier, which is Jeff's side of it. Then the longest distance relationship. Jeff makes contact with Haley by radio, and what he does with the one conversation he gets is tell her not to wait for him, to move on with her life, which for a character whose entire function up to this point had been to be a pleasant stoner who says nice things vaguely, is a considerable moment. There's a detail in that episode I love, which is that Jeff travels through a wormhole trying to get home and ends up in the future instead, where he finds that Steve and Snot have ended up together as a couple, having agreed that if neither of them had a girlfriend by 21, they'd give it a go. Their only regret is that they should have set the age higher. That's a throwaway. But it's also the show quietly answering a question about Steve that it otherwise never touches. Then finally, holy shit, Jeff's back. Jeff comes home. Almost everyone is delighted by Jeff's return. And it isn't Jeff. It's an alien called Zeblir, pretending to be him, and the real Jeff has been dissected. The resolution is that Jeff's brain gets transplanted into Zeblir's body, which means the real Jeff does get to live. And then Stan and Haley have their memories wiped, so they never learn any of it. Sit with that for a second, because I don't think the show ever quite lets you. Haley Smith spent multiple seasons married to a man who was not physically human, and she was chemically prevented from being able to know. Her husband's body is alien. Her memories of finding out have been removed by her father's employer, and she's fine because being fine was arranged for her. The show then does something I genuinely didn't expect, which is follow through on the biology. At the end of an episode called Bahama Mama, Roger mentions, offhand, that Jeff can't get Haley pregnant. Because of the body, because he's alien now, and the plumbing doesn't work that way. That's a consequence, an actual, mechanical, ongoing consequence of a plot from 2 seasons earlier, raised in a completely different episode, and it creates a problem the show then has to solve. It solves it in Roger's Baby, in which Roger rebirths Jeff and makes him human again. I'm not going to describe the process. It's a lot, and it's better experienced than summarized, but the arc is complete. Abducted, enslaved, tested, dissected, transplanted into an alien body, wiped from his wife's memory, and eventually regrown by the creature that started it. Across 3 seasons, in a network cartoon about a CIA agent. And what I keep coming back to is that Roger did all of it. Roger threw him up there. Roger's ex-boyfriend enslaved him. Roger's people dissected him. And Roger fixed him at the end, which is presented as a redemption, and is really just a man cleaning up after himself. Right. Steve Smith has been redesigned twice, which is unusual, and the changes tell you what the show was trying to work out about itself. The original Steve is in the unaired pilot presentation, which was a 6-minute thing used to sell the show to Fox and never broadcast. It's rougher, the colours are weaker, and Steve looks and dresses quite differently. He's also voiced by a different actor entirely, Ricky Blitt, and his personality isn't the same. By the actual series premiere, Scott Grimes had taken over the voice, and Steve had been made taller, less obviously geeky, and more filled out. And then after the early seasons, they went back in and softened him again, made him cuter, more emotional, more endearing. And the stated reason for that is contrast. They wanted a sharper gap between Steve and his father's whole rugged chest-out, weapons expert thing, which is the opposite of what most shows do with a dad and a son. Family Guy's approach is to make Chris a smaller copy of Peter. American Dad went the other way and built them as opposites and got 2 decades of material out of the friction. Now the theory, and it's not really a theory, it's more of a prediction that people have been making for about 15 years. Steve is going to snap. The reasoning is straightforward accumulation. He is the most consistently humiliated character in the show. He loses every girl. Every single one. Sometimes to circumstance, frequently to his own family, and quite often to his father specifically. And people have been waiting for the episode where the accounting comes due. Attached to that is a much better observation, which is about why it keeps happening. Stan doesn't want to be a grandfather. That's the theory. It explains why he sabotages Steve's relationships, sometimes unconsciously and sometimes not. It explains why he's never happy with any of Haley's partners. It explains why he seemed genuinely relaxed about Jeff being fired into space. And it explains a moment in Steve and Snot's test tubular adventure, where Stan keeps trying to kill a girl called Glitter, even after Steve tells him he's her father. And then Bahama Mama more or less confirmed it, which is a rare case of a fan theory being right and the show acknowledging it. And I'd imagine the person who called it was insufferable about it for weeks. Fair enough, honestly. 2 more people in Steve's orbit worth mentioning. Barry Robinson, who is on medication, and when he's off it, he becomes an extremely capable, extremely calm, extremely dangerous person with a completely different voice. The pills are the only thing standing between Langley Falls and whatever Barry actually is. The theory here is that his parents are keeping him overweight on purpose. The reasoning being that if the medication can't fully suppress him mentally, and it demonstrably can't because things slip out, then the next best option is to suppress him physically. Endless junk food, no exercise, keep him slow and comfortable. Because a Barry who is off his pills and physically fit is a considerably worse proposition than a Barry who is off his pills and out of breath. There's a more mundane version, which is that the medication itself causes lethargy and weight gain, which is a real thing that real medications do. That's probably the truth. It's not as fun. And Snot, who exists mostly as Steve's ballast and who ends up as his husband in one possible future, because neither of them could manage anything else. I've said before that this show will put something with real weight in the background and wander off. That's another one. A glimpse of 2 lonely men in their 20s settling for each other and being reasonably content about it, delivered as a joke, inside an episode about a wormhole. Since we're on the subject of things the show established, and then let sit. 3 separate series finales have been written for this show. Not planned, not discussed, written. 3 episodes were written to be potential last ones, and none of them were. And all 3 of them aired as normal episodes with people watching them having no idea what they were looking at. They are Hot Water, Echoes, and Guardian. I want to start with Hot Water because it's the strangest of the 3 by a distance. It's the Season 7 premiere. Stan buys a hot tub. The hot tub is evil, and at the end of it, the hot tub kills Stan and swallows Francine. That's the episode. That's how it ends. The hot tub kills Stan and traps Francine. The 2 lead characters die, and there's no walk back. And the reason for that is that the people making the show at the time genuinely feared Fox wasn't going to renew them. So they wrote an ending. If the axe fell, that was the last thing anyone would ever see of the Smiths. And it would have been a genuinely bleak and very odd note to go out on. Then the renewal came through, and rather than shelve it, they aired it as a season premiere and quietly treated it as a dark standalone story, which means American Dad opened a season with an episode in which its protagonists die, and then carried on the following week as though it hadn't happened. And the audience largely accepted this, because by that point the audience had been trained. Echoes and Guardian came much later in the same circumstances. Uncertainty about the show's future, a script written to serve as an ending in case it was needed, and then it wasn't needed. I find the whole pattern quietly touching, actually. This is a show that has spent its entire existence expecting to be cancelled, and has repeatedly written itself a goodbye just in case. 3 times somebody sat down and worked out how to end it properly because they didn't trust that they'd get the warning. Now, the 100th episode, because it's connected to all of this. It's called 100 AD, and the promotional framing was that 100 characters would die. There's a death counter on screen, there's a silhouette of Roger as the Grim Reaper, and Roger himself steps out in front of a curtain doing a Crypt Keeper impression, coughing, holding a cigarette, saying these things are going to kill him. The counter almost ticks over to 1, and he hits it. The joke is that it doesn't happen. Or rather, it does, but not in the way the framing suggested, because American Dad milestone episodes are constitutionally incapable of playing it straight, which is worth noting alongside the 200th episode we talked about earlier, where the show's response to a milestone was to destroy the world. This is not a series that does clip shows. Let's talk about the timeline, because it's the thing that makes the finales interesting, rather than just sad. Nobody ages. Steve stays 14. Hayley stays wherever Hayley is. The floating timeline is standard for the format, and American Dad uses it exactly as everyone else does. But structural changes do stick, and that's the difference. Hayley and Jeff got married and stayed married. Jeff's body changed and stayed changed until the show did the work to change it back. Roger acquired a son. Klaus's original body was found and destroyed, and that door closed. These things happened, and they held. So you've got a show where time doesn't move, but events accumulate, which is a strange and specific place to be. The characters aren't getting older, but they are getting more complicated, and I think that's why the show has been able to run for as long as it has, without the sense of exhaustion that hangs around some of its contemporaries. There's always more history to draw on, even though nobody's had a birthday. Now, Langley Falls itself. The town is genuinely unresolved as an object, and I mean that as praise. Here's what we know about it. It contains a house that produces rooms nobody has ever seen before, and we've been through those. It's the sort of place where a man with a secret underground control room is a normal resident. Its social fabric is held together by the fake identities of one alien, which we established earlier, and which remains the single, funniest structural fact about any fictional town I can think of. And when a catastrophic blast devastates Langley Falls, its population turns cannibal within what appears to be a fairly short window. Principal Lewis becomes a warlord. The residents of a comfortable Virginia commuter suburb, the sort of place with good schools and a farmer's market, start eating each other. That's not a town. That's a lid on something. There's a technique the show uses that I think reinforces this, and the writers have talked about it as a deliberate thing. American Dad will lose interest in its own plot mid-episode and follow somebody else. We've seen it with The Golden Object, but it does it in smaller ways too. The clearest example is The Bird. In The Missing Kink, the episode repeatedly cuts away from its own story to check in on Hayley's disastrous rebound date with snot. And Francine can understand what the bird is saying. This is not explained. She just can. It's not established before, and it's not mentioned after. That's a show telling you that the world extends past the frame and that the Smiths are not the point. Which is, I think, why the town feels bigger than it should. Most sitcom towns only exist when a main character is standing in them. Langley Falls has stuff going on. Right, one last piece of production trivia here, because it explains something about the texture of the show that I'd wondered about for years. American Dad works enormously far ahead. Barker has said that at any given point, there might be 20 to 42 episodes, finished and waiting for final touches, which means the gap between writing a joke and broadcasting it can be a couple of years. And the consequence of that is that the show can't be topical. It structurally cannot chase the news. So the writing has to be built out of things that will still be true in 2 years, which Barker described as trying to keep it evergreen, and which is why the show's humour comes from ego and family and the human condition rather than from references. There's a story he tells that I love. They wrote a joke about Harriet Mears, who was briefly in the news in the mid-2000s, and by the time it actually aired, Barker was watching his own show and had to go and look up who his own joke was about, because it had been so long since it was pitched. That's the trade-off. You lose the ability to be current, and in exchange your show doesn't rot. And it's a large part of why American Dad from 2009 plays better today than a lot of things made last year. I don't think that was a grand artistic decision. I think it was a production constraint that the writers turned into a discipline. But those are often the good ones. And then there's the question of whether any of this is even happening in the same universe as the other show. In 2011, the same hurricane hit 3 towns. That's the cleanest evidence there is, so let's start there. The crossover event was called Night of the Hurricane, and it ran across Family Guy, The Cleveland Show, and American Dad. The American Dad installment is simply called Hurricane, and it's one of the better episodes of that season, mostly because it's a survival story in which Stan is catastrophically bad at survival. The 3 shows aren't in the same room, but the same storm system hits Quahog, Stool Bend, and Langley Falls on the same night, which is about as clear a statement of shared geography as you can make without putting the characters in a car together. And there have been direct contacts too. Roger has turned up in Family Guy. Bart Simpson has turned up in American Dad, in an episode called Faking Bad. Stan appears as a background character in a single panel of a Futurama comic, which is the kind of detail that only exists because somebody in an art department was having a nice day. My favourite of these, and it's not even from a MacFarlane show, is from The Simpsons. In an episode called The Italian Bob, there's a moment where an Italian sheriff has a book of criminal offenders. Peter Griffin is in it, labelled plagiarismo, and so is Stan, labelled plagiarismo di plagiarismo. Plagiarism of plagiarism. As a joke about American Dad, that's brutal. And I have to say, it's also fair. The show was made to fill a Family Guy-shaped hole, and the early seasons look like it. Family Guy has returned the favour, twice, by parodying the American Dad opening titles. The first time was in Season 9, with Joe Swanson taking Stan's place in the credits. The second was in Season 18, where Meg has been traded over to American Dad and attempts to sing the theme. She fumbles the lyrics, and both Stan and Roger tell her to shut up. And there's a moment in a Family Guy episode called Regarding Carter, where Peter tries to sign off to Stan the way he sometimes does, and finds that American Dad isn't on Fox anymore. He asks whether the replacement has done any better, and is met with silence from his family. That one aged into something quite different, and we'll come back to it in a bit. Right, now the metafiction, which is where this stops being fun trivia and starts being a genuine problem. There is a scene in which Stan lists his favourite fictional dogs. He names Brian Griffin. Brian Griffin is standing right there. And Brian reacts the way a celebrity reacts to being recognised by someone slightly too enthusiastic, with a wary, "Do I know you?" So Stan has named a dog he is currently in a room with as fictional. It gets worse. In another scene, Steve and Roger are watching Family Guy on television. He is commenting on it, and the episode he's watching is one the audience has seen, in which Brian decides to become a Republican for a while, and Stan approves of him for it. Stan Smith is a Family Guy viewer. He has opinions about the character arcs. And then, separately, there's an episode called Blood Crieth Unto Heaven, in which the American Dad characters are apparently actors playing themselves. It's a gag. It's a fourth wall break, except the episode has been referenced since, which in a show that maintains continuity is not nothing. There's a similar thing in Family Guy, where the American Dad characters cut filming to celebrate a milestone joke count, and a production crew is revealed behind them. So we have a situation where American Dad appears to be a television show inside the Family Guy universe, and Family Guy appears to be a television show inside the American Dad universe. And both shows also share a hurricane. The fan attempts to resolve this go three ways. Either American Dad is the real one, and Family Guy is a show within it. Or Family Guy is the real one, and American Dad is a show within it. Or they're fictional within each other in an infinite loop, which is my preferred option purely on aesthetic grounds. There's a decent argument that they're not the same universe at all, and it's a theological one. The two shows have different gods, not different portrayals, different characters, with different rules and different relationships to their creations, and the two Jesuses are entirely separate people. We spent a fair while with the American Dad Jesus earlier, and he is not the same bloke. I think the honest answer is that none of this is meant to resolve. These are winks. They're the shows acknowledging their own artificiality for 4 seconds, and then getting on with the plot. And the moment you try to build a coherent cosmology out of a wink, you've lost. But there is one crossover theory I'm genuinely fond of, and I want to end this section on it because it's completely mad and the evidence is unreasonably good. Susie Swanson is one of Avery Bullock's avatars. Right, let me build it because it's better than it sounds. Susie Swanson is Joe and Bonnie's baby daughter in Family Guy, and in that show she has an inner monologue. She thinks articulately in a voice the audience can hear. Patrick Stewart provides the voice of Avery Bullock on American Dad. Patrick Stewart plays Avery Bullock in American Dad. Now on its own, that's a casting coincidence and nothing more. Voice actors work across shows. Stewart has done plenty of animation. That proves nothing. Except we already established something in an earlier bit of this. In Virtual Insanity, the CIA has remotely operated avatars, and Bullock volunteers, unprompted, that one of his is a baby, and that he uses it for personal reasons, and he does not explain what those reasons are. If Family Guy and American Dad share a universe, and they at minimum share weather, then the CIA that builds baby avatars operating in Langley is the same CIA that could be operating in Quahog. So the theory is that there is no Susie Swanson. There is a remotely piloted infant occupied by the deputy director of the CIA living in the Swanson house. For personal reasons, he has declined to state. Is that true? No, obviously not. It's a casting overlap and a throwaway line from 2 different writers' rooms who have never spoken about it. But it is very funny that the pieces fit that neatly, and it's exactly the sort of thing that happens when 2 shows share a universe casually rather than carefully. There's a smaller Bullock theory that I'll mention because it's more plausible and less silly. Bullock knows about Roger. He's the deputy director. He has access to everything. The agency has an entire floor looking for an escaped Roswell alien, and Bullock is above that floor. He is extremely good at reading people, professionally so, and he has spent 20 years in regular social and professional proximity to a man who is obviously hiding something, and an alien in a series of wigs. The theory is that he's known the whole time and is running a long test, watching whether Stan will crack, watching whether Roger is any actual danger, which, on the evidence of what Roger has done to Langley Falls, would suggest the test came back with a fairly alarming result some time ago, and Bullock simply hasn't filed the report. Honestly, that tracks. That's very Bullock. One last thing, and it's less a mystery than a genuinely odd survival story. The 6th of February, 2005. American Dad premiered directly after Super Bowl 39, which is about as good a launch slot as television has ever had. Roughly 15 million people watched the episode. Around 19 million watched the block it sat in, and then it went away for 3 months. The rest of the first season didn't start until the 1st of May, as part of the debut of Fox's animation domination lineup. American Dad was the first series made specifically for that block, which is a piece of trivia I find genuinely surprising, because in the popular memory, it's the show that turned up later and hung about at the edges. Here's the thing about why it existed at all, and it's a bit sad. American Dad was made because Family Guy had been cancelled, and because Seth MacFarlane wanted a new outlet to satirise Bush-era politics. That's the whole origin. Fox had an audience left over from a show they'd killed. That audience was loud, and MacFarlane was offered another half hour to keep them occupied. American Dad was the consolation prize. It was built to fill the hole left by a series that no longer existed. And 3 months after it launched, Family Guy came back. So this show spent its opening year competing directly against the programme it was created to replace, on the same night, on the same network, made by the same man, which is a genuinely absurd position to be in, and it's not a surprise that critics were unkind. A fair few of them wrote it off before it aired. One Washington Post piece before the premiere called it disappointing and said the look and pace were the same as Family Guy, which in the first season is a completely reasonable thing to say. MacFarlane's response to this was, I think, the correct one, and it's the reason the show survived. He let go of it. He handed creative control to Barker and Weitzman precisely so the two shows would diverge. And he has been open about the fact that for the first several seasons, he didn't really understand American Dad. His phrase was that he was just going along for the ride. He voiced Stan and Roger and left the driving to other people. And then it became something. Barker and Weitzman found the thing that made it work, and MacFarlane came round to it, partly through watching his own followers get excited about Roger. He became a fan of his own show, which is a slightly strange sentence, but it's roughly what happened. Barker's own description of the difference is the best one I've come across. He said American Dad isn't as reference-laden as Family Guy or South Park, and that its humour comes more from the human condition and the emotions everyone can relate to, ego, bureaucracy, and that because of that, he thought it was a bit more evergreen. He was right. That's exactly what happened. Now the departure. In November 2013, Mike Barker left American Dad. He'd been co-creator, executive producer, and co-showrunner for 10 seasons. Weitzman became sole showrunner. Brian Boyle came in to replace Barker, and the timing of that is the thing I keep circling. Barker left just as production began for the move to cable, which means the drift that fans argue about, the shift in Klaus, the change in tone, the loosening of the world, lines up roughly with the period when one of the two people who'd been steering the thing stepped away from day-to-day show-running duties. That's not a theory. That's just a date sitting next to another date. But it's a better explanation for the change than heaven is, and I did promise we'd come back to it. Right, the cancellations plural. On the 16th of July, 2013, Fox cancelled American Dad. TBS picked it up almost immediately for a 15-episode order, and there was a period of genuine confusion about the season numbering, which persists to this day and is why you'll see the same episode listed under 3 different season numbers depending on where you're looking. Fox had 3 unaired episodes left over and aired them in September 2014. TBS considered Blonde Ambition the start of their run. Hulu and Disney bundle things differently again. It's a mess, and it's a mess that started at the very beginning, because the first 7 episodes and the following 16 have been counted as either 1 season or 2 ever since 2005. TBS also, rather charmingly, debuted their first episode a week early by quietly putting it on YouTube and Facebook on the 13th of October 2014. The proper television debut was the 20th, and the show performed well enough on cable that TBS ordered another season within about a month. It stayed there for a decade. Then on the 21st of March 2025, TBS declined to order any more. The season 21 finale aired 3 days later on the 24th. For about a day, American Dad was a cancelled show for the second time in its life. And on the same day, negotiations were already underway to take it back to Fox. In April 2025, that was confirmed, with a 4-season order that carries it through to the 2028 and 2029 television season. Season 25 is currently on the books. A new season premiered on Fox on the 22nd of February 2026, back in animation domination, alongside Family Guy. 12 years after it left the network, American Dad returned to Fox, which means that Gag Regarding Carter, where Peter tries to sign off to Stan and finds American Dad isn't on Fox anymore and gets glum silence from the room, has now been overtaken by events. Stan's back. The joke expired. One more number, and then I'll stop with the numbers. In December 2025, Disney announced that American Dad was among the series to pass 1 billion hours streamed on Disney Plus over the course of that year. 1 billion hours. For a show that was made as a placeholder for a cancelled cartoon, panned before it aired, dropped by its network, exiled to cable for a decade, and then dropped again. I find that genuinely lovely, and I'll tell you why. There's a version of the television industry where American Dad doesn't survive any of that. It gets cancelled in 2013, and it becomes a thing people vaguely remember. It's the other one. The one that wasn't Family Guy. Instead, it turns out that what it was building all that time, the continuity, the arcs that stick, the world with a bit of depth in it, is exactly the thing that rewards the way people watch television now. You can put it on and keep going. Things happen. It's not the same 22 minutes forever. That was never a strategy. Barker and Weitzman weren't writing for a streaming environment that didn't exist yet. They were just making the show they wanted to make while nobody was paying much attention, because nobody was paying much attention. And the thing that was made to be a stopgap has now outlived every expectation that was ever set for it, including its own writers, who wrote it a goodbye 3 separate times because they didn't think it would get one. American Dad has been at war with Santa Claus for over a decade, and I don't think most people realise it's a continuous story. It starts in season 6 with an episode called For Whom the Sleigh Bell Tolls. Steve kills Santa, not on purpose particularly, but near enough. And Santa survives, and rather than let it go, he vows revenge on the Smith family. That's the inciting incident. Everything else follows from a teenager in Virginia making a bad decision at Christmas. The arc then expands in minstrel Krampus, which is where Krampus enters the show. Krampus, for anyone who hasn't come across him, is the folkloric counterweight to St. Nicholas in parts of Central Europe. The idea is that Nicholas rewards the good children, and Krampus deals with the bad ones. And the dealing with is not gentle. He's a horned thing, with a sack and a bundle of birch. And at the end of that episode, Stan's father Jack fuses with Krampus' soul, and becomes the new Krampus. I mentioned earlier that Jack fuses with Krampus, and said I'd leave it there. I'm picking it back up now, because the follow-through is the interesting bit. That wasn't a gag ending. Jack Smith remained Krampus. He held the position for years of broadcast time, and he only stopped when the character died in season 17. So Stan's absentee jewel thief father spent the back half of his life as a European folk demon, and then died in the role. And the show treated this as an ordinary fact about the family. The war escalates in season 14 with 90 north, 0 west, which is the one that surprised me most on first watch. Santa kidnaps Steve, and the plan is not a Christmas plan. The plan is to take over the world by unleashing an ancient god that has been sitting under the North Pole. That's not a comedy Santa, that's a cosmic horror plot in which Father Christmas is the antagonist, and there is a sleeping god beneath the ice. He appears to die at the end. He falls from the giant Humbaba and breaks his neck, which the show then had to walk back, and it did so the following season in Santa Schmanta, which explains the death and revives him by the end. He's back again in season 20 in Into the Jingleverse, where he gives Stan a set of virtual reality goggles so he can trap the Smith family in his Christmas metaverse, which is a very Stan thing to want and a very Santa thing to weaponize. And then in season 21, in Nasty Christmas, something quite unusual happens. Santa isn't the villain. He's trying to get back together with Mrs. Claus. He's got his own problems. But the show does not let him off entirely, because Stan and Klaus both express open disbelief that he got out of the Jingleverse at all, which I love. Two characters standing there in a Christmas episode going, "Hang on, how are you here? We dealt with you." That's continuity being used for a joke that only lands if you've been paying attention for a decade. And in a show with a floating timeline where nobody has aged a day across the entire war, there is nevertheless a complete record of grievances between a family and a mythological figure. Now here's the thing I actually want to say about the Christmas episodes, because it explains something structural. Christmas is where American Dad does its big swings. The Apocalypse episode we spent a while on earlier is a Christmas episode. The Punishment Family reveal is a Christmas episode. Krampus is a Christmas episode. The God Under the North Pole is a Christmas episode. And I think there's a straightforward production reason for that, which is that the Christmas special is traditionally allowed to be a bit unhinged. Nobody expects a Christmas episode to bind. It's the one slot in the year where a show can kill its lead, end the world, or reveal that the entire cast is a corrective measure, and everyone accepts that we'll be back to normal in the new year. American Dad noticed that and used it very deliberately as an escape valve. All the ideas too big for the ordinary run got parked in December, which is also, if you want to be uncharitable about it, why the theory that the show has been in heaven since 2009 doesn't hold. It relies on a Christmas episode binding in a show that has spent 20 years demonstrating that Christmas episodes are the ones that don't. But it also means something slightly wonderful, which is that if you watch only the Christmas episodes of American Dad in order, you get a completely different program. A serialized fantasy epic about a suburban family's ongoing feud with the supernatural, in which fathers become demons, gods sleep under the ice, and the rapture came and went, and the world had to be rebuilt. That show is genuinely stranger and more ambitious than the one it's hiding inside. And I'd watch it. I have watched it, actually, which is how I know it holds together better than it has any right to. There's a small thing I'll add here about tone, because it comes up in the Christmas run more than anywhere. American Dad has this quality where it will construct something with actual grandeur and then refuse to be impressed by it. The God Under the North Pole doesn't get an awed reaction. Krampus doesn't get a reverent introduction. These things arrive, they're dealt with. Somebody makes a comment about the drive home. I've come to think that's the show's actual signature, more than any of the surrealism. Not that mad things happen, but that nobody in Langley Falls finds them remarkable, which, given the town has an alien in the loft and a man in a fish, is probably the correct posture. Since we've drifted into Roger's biology by way of an alien god, let's stay there for a bit, because there's a whole other side of him we've barely touched. Roger has no bones. He's said it more than once, and in an episode called Stand, Dan, Deliver, he puts it plainly. No bones at all. He's made entirely of cartilage. There's an earlier episode, American Dream Factory, where he turns out to be an accomplished drummer, and the explanation given is that there's nothing in his arms. He can just do it because he doesn't have any bones in his arms. His limbs are ropes with hands on the end, and it turns out that's an enormous advantage behind a kit. I mention this partly because it's funny, and partly because it recontextualizes about 15 years of physical comedy. Every time Roger has been hit by a car, dropped from a height, set on fire, or folded into something he shouldn't fit inside, and walked away from it, the reason is his durable alien physiology. He's also fireproof, and he can generate electricity, and he survived exposure to the vacuum of space by hitching a ride on the outside of a rocket. Which happened, by the way. The Smiths tried to escape into orbit to get away from him, and he was on the hull. But the piece of biology that the show has done the most with, and I mean this as a compliment to whoever pitched it, is the tumours. When Roger is under stress, his body grows large tumours, and when those tumours are removed, they don't die. They become fully sentient organisms in their own right. That is how Rogu exists. Rogu is Roger's son. He is technically and canonically a tumour that was cut out of an alien and then developed a personality. He joined the main cast in season 15, which means an ex-tumour has been a headline character on an American network comedy for nearly a decade. He's also voiced by D. Bradley Baker, the same actor who does Klaus, which means one man is doing both the goldfish and the growth. Now the theory here is one I find quietly chilling, and it comes from the same corner of the fan community that has been picking at the persona problem for years. The argument is that Rogu is not the first. The reasoning goes like this. We know Roger can produce independent life from his own body. We know that his personas hold down jobs, marriages and criminal records in locations he cannot physically be at the same time. And we know he has been here for the better part of 80 years, with a great deal of free time and a demonstrated interest in complicated schemes. So what if some of the personas aren't disguises at all? What if some of them are staffed? What if, over 80 years, Roger has been asexually producing copies of himself to occupy the identities he can't personally maintain? And Rogu is simply the first one we've been formally introduced to, because he happened to be produced on screen. And the extension of that, which is the part I keep turning over, is that Rogu is an immature Roger. Given time, he grows into a full one, which would mean the Roger we met in 2005 and the Roger we have now might not be the same individual. The drift in his personality across the run from a sensitive pushover who gets taken advantage of into something genuinely cruel might not be a character arc at all. It might be a replacement. I don't believe it, but it's the only theory I've come across that explains the early seasons properly, and the early seasons genuinely are a problem. Because Roger in season 1 is a different creature. He's sad. He's lonely. He's confined to the house and miserable about it. He gets cheated and ridiculed, and the show frames him as a bit of a victim. There's a persuasive counter-theory, which is that this was a persona too, that the depressed housebound alien was a character Roger was performing, complete with an invented species and invented limitations, because he was bored and it seemed like a laugh, which would explain why his first attempts at disguise are so bad that people comment on how deformed he looks and why he can now pass as anyone he likes. He wasn't getting better at it. He was playing someone bad at it. Right. The family, because Roger has one and it's horrible. His father was called Fred. Roger ate him. He was 15 at the time. And the show presents this in an episode called I Am the Walrus as a normal developmental milestone for his species. Something everyone does. A thing Roger says happened when he came of age is that he ate his father. He has an aunt, Caroline, who we've already covered and who died in a crash he caused, and an uncle called Rizbo, who I know almost nothing about, which is probably for the best. So the complete picture of Roger's family life is that he consumed his father as a teenager and killed his aunt in a vehicle accident. Whether that means he's a monster or means his species is simply built differently is a question the show has enjoyed leaving open. Personally, I lean towards the second, and I say that because of the way he behaves with Rogu. He's a good father, bewilderingly good considering. He's protective, he's proud, He's soft about it in a way he isn't about anything else. A being who ate his own dad has turned out to be the most attentive parent in that house. And that's not a joke the show ever makes explicitly. It's just true if you line it up. There's one more relationship worth mentioning here, because it's the strangest thing in a show full of strange things. There's an episode called Cloga in which Roger and Klaus have an affair. It's conducted in secret from the family, and it ends because Klaus was only ever interested in the sneaking around. And the moment Roger wants to be an actual couple, Klaus loses interest. Roger's response is to try and manufacture new taboo by getting himself adopted as Klaus's daughter, which gets Klaus arrested. So Roger then gets himself arrested to be with him. And in prison, Roger stabs another inmate for coming between them and is put in solitary confinement for the remainder of his sentence. And it's in solitary that he works out what the whole thing had actually been about. Klaus didn't want a relationship with Roger. He was afraid of being alone. That's the ending of the episode. A 1600-year-old alien sitting by himself in a cell, having murdered a man over a goldfish, arriving at the correct diagnosis of his own behaviour. The show does not do anything with that afterwards. Of course it doesn't, but I think about it a fair bit, because it's the closest Roger has ever come to knowing himself, and it happened in a room he'd been put in as a punishment. All right, let's pull back out and talk about how this show actually operates, because the machinery is worth a look. Stan and Francine once built a wall through the middle of their house. The episode is called Home Wrecker, and it starts from about the most ordinary domestic disagreement available. They can't agree on how to remodel. That's it, that's the seed. So they divide the house. Each of them decorates their half in their preferred style, which is petty but survivable. Then they start trying to drive each other out. And then they build a colossal block wall down the middle of the property, and the two halves become genuinely separate homes. And the rest of the family have to spend one holiday after another, alternating between Fran's place and Stan's place. That's farce, and American Dad runs on it more than almost any other technique. The rule of farce is that the escalation has to be logical at every single step, so that by the time you reach the absurd conclusion, you can trace every link back to something reasonable. Nobody in Home Wrecker ever makes an insane decision. They make a series of slightly spiteful decisions in order and end up with a wall. You see the same structure in Stan's food restaurant. Stan asks Roger to help him open a restaurant. Roger takes over the design. Then he takes over the project entirely and pushes Stan out. Stan retaliates by opening a competing restaurant next door, which becomes an enormous success. Roger responds to that by blowing up Stan's restaurant, and in doing so, destroys his own. And the ending, which is my favourite bit, is that Stan threatens to kill him and then backs down, because Roger pulls a gun and tells him to relax. Not a resolution, not a lesson, a stalemate enforced by a firearm and the word relax. Now the other engine, which sits alongside the farce and is harder to describe. American Dad is a black comedy, in a way that I think has been genuinely underrated, and I want to give a couple of examples that aren't the obvious ones. There's an episode called Award Show, in which Roger becomes Steve's legal guardian. Steve is being picked on at school, and Roger's solution is to rig the teachers' cars with explosives and kill all of them. That's the first act. Later in the same episode, Principal Lewis is driving with Steve in the passenger seat and calmly informs him that he's about to drive off the Grand Canyon in a murder-suicide. Roger saves them. His love supernaturally allows the car to fly, and then, in mid-air, they collide with another car. Because another man, a white man, with a black boy in the passenger seat, had coincidentally driven off the opposite side of the Grand Canyon in his own murder-suicide attempt at the same moment. That's 4 separate attempts on children's lives in 22 minutes, and the punchline is a symmetrical mid-air crash. Or take Da Flippity Flop, which we spent a while on for the Klaus material. There's a subplot where Roger is leaving increasingly aggressive, answering machine messages trying to get Steve to sign up for his attic gym. And over the course of those messages, in the background of the audio, Roger kills 3 people through reckless driving, ends up in court over it, gets told off for not silencing his phone, and shoots a large number of people at the courthouse. All of that is a running gag inside a subplot inside an episode about a fish. Or Why Can't We Be Friends, where the hallways of the Smith house transform into dark alleyways every time Roger pays Jeff, and then ambushes him in disguise to steal the money back. The house physically changes shape to accommodate a mugging that's happening inside it. I think what makes this land rather than curdle is the delivery. Nothing is ever presented as shocking. There's no sting, no reaction shot inviting you to be appalled. Barker and Weitzman have both talked about this, about how they get scruples adding certain material and then go ahead with it anyway, because the goal is laughs combined with groans. Going over the line on purpose and then not acknowledging the line. And there's a third technique that I think is the show's most distinctive and least discussed, which is the wandering. We touched on it with the bird and with the golden object, but let me name it properly. American Dad will sometimes lose interest in its own protagonists mid-episode and go and follow strangers instead. Characters we've never seen, in situations that have nothing to do with the plot, whose lives we then get invested in for a few minutes before the show remembers what it was doing. Most shows can't do that. The format doesn't allow it. 22 minutes is not a lot of time, and you're meant to spend it on the people in the title sequence. American Dad just wanders off, and I think it's the single clearest sign that this show was made by people who are not being watched closely and knew it. There's a nice example of how the writers describe their own process, and it's more mundane than you'd expect. Barker has said that plot ideas arrive from anywhere, and you can never predict where. The specific case he gives is an episode called All About Steve, where Stan wants his son to be more of a jock. The whole episode grew out of one of their writers, Dave Hemmingson, coming into the office and mentioning that he'd been to the dentist and might need braces. They liked the image of a grown man in braces, so they put Stan in braces, and from that came an episode about a man understanding for the first time what it feels like to be a geek. That's it. That's the origin. A bloke's teeth. Then the process is roughly 2 weeks in a room with all the writers, breaking the story and making sure both act breaks are strong. Barker was specific about the act breaks and about deliberately twisting the story so that people come back after the advertisements. Then one writer goes off with 2 weeks to produce a script, brings it back, and everybody edits it and punches the jokes and checks the motivations before it goes to a table read. Weitzman's favourite part of all this is the editing. Barker's was breaking the story, which tells you something about the two of them, and probably explains why the partnership worked as long as it did. The last thing I'll say about the machinery is the thing they've all said about the workload, and it surprised me. MacFarlane has been asked about the difference between making an animated show and a live-action one, and he's not remotely diplomatic about it. His position is that a traditional sitcom feels like a breeze by comparison. You can shoot it in a couple of months rather than a year, whereas an animated episode is like assembling a small film every week, storyboarded with the intricacy of a feature action sequence, cut with a musical score in mind, and scored by a full orchestra. Barker's view was almost the opposite. He found animation freeing because you never have to worry about sets. They're both right, obviously, but I like that two people who ran the same show for a decade had directly contradictory feelings about what it was like to make it. And I'll leave you with the detail Barker gave about the limits of that freedom, which is that because you can keep changing an animated episode right up until it airs, it becomes very difficult to accept anything less than perfect. At some point you have to bring the hammer down at the colour stage and live with what you've got, which is, I think, a fairly good description of making anything. There's one more layer to all this that we haven't touched, and it's the people actually doing the voices. The cast of American Dad do not record together. That's not a scheduling thing, or at least it isn't only a scheduling thing. The actors have said outright that the reason is their own personalities. Put them in a room together and they mess about, and nothing gets finished. So they each go in on their own and read their lines into a microphone with nobody else present, which means the family dynamic in this show, all that overlapping bickering, all the timing between Stan and Francine and Haley and Steve, has been assembled in an edit suite out of performances given by people who were alone in a booth. I find that genuinely remarkable. 21 years of a family, and the performers were rarely in the same room to build it. Let's go through who's actually doing what, because it's worth laying out. Seth MacFarlane does Stan and Roger, which means Roger's hundreds of personas are also him, and a fair few of those sound nothing like each other, and nothing like Roger, and nothing like Stan. It is, as the production staff have pointed out, a showcase for range that most actors would never get an opportunity to attempt. Wendy Schaal does Francine, and I think she's the most underappreciated person on this show by a distance. Francine is written to be sunny and slightly vacant, and Schaal keeps finding these little cracks in it where something much harder shows through. When Francine snaps, it's terrifying, and it's terrifying because of the voice and not the writing. Scott Grimes does Steve, having taken over from Ricky Blitt after the unaired pilot presentation. Rachel MacFarlane does Haley, and yes, that's Seth's sister, which means a substantial amount of the ideological screaming in this show is two siblings arguing on separate days in separate rooms. She's also a genuinely good singer, and the show made use of it. To promote a Season 9 episode called Love AD Style, Concord Records put out an actual album called Haley Sings, performed by Rachel MacFarlane in character. Dee Bradley Baker does Klaus, and also Rogu, which we mentioned. And then there's Jeff Fisher, who is voiced by Jeff Fisher. Not a coincidence and not a stage name. The character is named after the actor, or possibly the other way round, and he became a main cast member in Season 7. Patrick Stewart plays Avery Bullock, which I've mentioned in passing but which deserves a proper moment. Patrick Stewart, playing the Deputy Director of the CIA in a cartoon. For 20 years, and clearly enjoying every second of it. There is a specific pleasure in hearing that voice, the one people know from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and the captain's chair, delivering some of the material Bullock has been asked to deliver. Now the music, because this is the part I think almost nobody knows, and it's my favourite piece of trivia about the show. American Dad uses a full orchestra, not a synthesizer pretending to be one, not a small ensemble, a proper orchestra scoring every episode, which is an enormous and expensive thing to do for a Sunday night cartoon. The composers are Walter Murphy, Joel McNeely, and Ron Jones, and Murphy wrote the theme. And the theme has a detail in it that I only found out relatively recently, and now cannot unhear. The opening of Good Morning USA is built on a variation of the introduction to Stars and Stripes Forever, which is a perfect joke, and it's a musical one, delivered before a single word of the show has been spoken. Sousa's March is the most straightforwardly patriotic piece of music in the American repertoire, and they've taken the opening of it and turned it into the front door of a show about a man whose patriotism is a mental illness. The music got recognised too. In June 2013, the American Society of Composers, Authors and Publishers gave American Dad its award for top television series. Not for writing, for the music. The show has also picked up 4 Primetime Emmy nominations and 2 Annie nominations over the years, which is a respectable haul for a series that spent most of its life being treated as an afterthought. There's a soundtrack album, American Dad Greatest Hits, which came out in October 2024 and collects 19 songs from across the show's history. If you've never gone looking for the musical numbers, as a body of work, they hold up considerably better than you'd expect, and that's the orchestra doing it. A few other bits of merchandise and adjacent business, because they're pleasingly random. In 2015, for the 10th anniversary, Zen Studios put out an American Dad pinball table on Zen Pinball 2 and Pinball FX2, with paper cutouts of the cast in the background and clips from the show. In 2016, the characters turned up in a card game called Animation Throwdown, alongside Family Guy, Futurama, Bob's Burgers, and King of the Hill, with Archer joining years later, which is a lineup that would make a genuinely excellent pub quiz round. Playtech released an officially licensed American Dad online slot in 2017, which I'm going to describe as an interesting choice and move on. A mobile game titled American Dad. Apocalypse Soon was released in 2019 and achieved tens of thousands of downloads across Android and Apple platforms. Apocalypse Soon, which passed 10 million downloads across Android and Apple. And in 2022, the Smiths showed up in a mobile racing game called Warped Kart Racers, alongside Family Guy, King of the Hill, and Solar Opposites. There's also a piece of production trivia about the animation itself that I think is worth mentioning, because it's true of most American animation, and almost nobody thinks about it. Roughly 50 animators from the Fox Animation Group work on the show, and a great deal is done in-house. Poses, models, props, all the storyboards, all the timing. And then the colouring and detailing goes overseas to Year-In Productions in Korea, which handles the end of the pre-production process. Yearim's name is on a very large amount of the animation you have watched in your life, without ever seeing the credit. One last thing, and it's a possibility rather than a fact. At Comic-Con in 2022, Matt Weitzman discussed the idea of a crossover with The Orville. The Orville is MacFarlane's live-action science fiction series, and it is, tonally, about as far from American Dad as you can get, while still being made by the same person. It's earnest, it's sincere, it's a genuine attempt at the kind of optimistic space opera that had gone out of fashion, and somebody has considered putting Roger in it. Nothing has come of that, and I'd be amazed if anything ever does, but the fact that it was discussed out loud on a panel by the person running the show is the sort of thing I enjoy knowing. Right, I think that's where I'll leave the machinery. Greg and Terry live across the street from the Smiths, and their house is tidier. That's the first thing you're told about them, and it's doing a lot of work. They're a couple. They run a neater and better organised home than the family we spend our time with, and they are both the local news anchors for WANG TV, which is a station name I've never once been able to say out loud without smiling. Greg has the misfortune of being the neighbour Stan drags into things. He's the one who lost both his legs to Principal Lewis during the apocalypse we covered earlier, and who then had to be carried across a ruined Virginia, strapped to Stan's back. There's a continuity error in that sequence where Greg is tied to Stan one moment and hopping along on his own the next, which people have picked up for years, and which I mention only because I find it funny that in an episode featuring 200 alien clones and a mutated dragonfish, the thing that broke the illusion, for people, was a knot. Then there's Principal Brian Lewis, who runs Pearl Bailey High School, and who is one of the more genuinely unsettling characters in the show once you stop laughing at him. He is described in various places as hedonistic and unprofessional, which is generous. He is a man in charge of children who is very obviously in the middle of a decades-long personal collapse, and the school appears to have no mechanism for noticing. He also has a daughter, Janet, and the show has never shown her living with him. That's it. That's the whole mystery. She's enrolled at the local school, she's clearly comfortable financially, she's around, and whenever any of the main characters go to Lewis's house, she isn't there. The fan explanations are the ones you'd expect. She lives with her mother, who presumably has custody, and frankly, should. Or she's in foster care, though that sits awkwardly with the fact that she's a spoiled and reasonably wealthy teenager. Or Lewis has partial custody, and she happens to be elsewhere every single time we visit. I'd point out that the funniest answer is also the most likely one, which is that nobody in that writer's room thought about it, and a decade later, a large number of people on the internet have thought about it a great deal. Stelios is worth a moment because he's the show's best sight gag and its most sustained joke. Stelio was Stan's childhood bully. He appears, his theme music plays, and terrible things happen. And in a wonderful bit of construction, when Roger needs to solve Steve's bully problem, his solution is to hire Stan's bully to bully Steve, on the logic that Steve's original bully won't want another bully's leftovers. Which then goes wrong, because Steve encourages his bully to go and confront the man who beats him up, at which point the two bullies recognise each other, team up, and go after Steve together. And Stelio, delighted, makes his entrance as the theme music plays. Stelio has never spoken, which has produced a small and very silly theory that there must be a reason. That his voice is unexpectedly high, or he sounds like a woman, or he sounds like a child, and that the joke, if it ever lands, is that Stan should react to hearing him speak for the first time. That's the kind of theory I approve of. It costs nothing, and it makes the show slightly better. Linda Memory is one of Francine's friends, and she has been the subject of a long-running fan expectation that she'll eventually confess feelings for Francine. The show has flirted with it enough that people keep waiting. The proposed version tends to escalate rather dramatically, up to and including kidnapping, which I think says more about the theorists than about Linda. And then there are the Ladybugs. The Ladybugs are an organisation that came after Francine, and the show has never fully revisited their storyline, which produced the theory that they're global, and that Langley Falls is simply one branch of something much bigger, and that they'll be back. They haven't been back as main antagonists, 21 years and counting. There's a pattern in this show of introducing an organisation, letting it be genuinely menacing for 22 minutes, and then never returning to it. And I think it's connected to the wandering technique we discussed earlier. American Dad treats its own world as bigger than the show. Things exist off-screen. Some of them come back and some of them don't, in roughly the same proportion as things in life. Which brings me to a general theory about the town that I've come round to, and it isn't really a theory so much as an observation. Langley Falls has no functioning institutions. The school is run by a man in crisis. The CIA is the single largest employer, and it wipes memories, clones people, puts human brains into animals, and maintains an entire floor dedicated to finding an alien who's in the phone book under about 90 different names. The local news is two men from across the street. The police, insofar as they exist, have been shown stealing from their own evidence lockers. And the population has turned cannibal in the wake of the apocalyptic event. I've said that already, so I won't labour it. But the point is that the town's stability isn't institutional. There's no structure holding it up. What's holding it up, as established, is one alien maintaining a large number of fake people, and one CIA agent's ongoing decision not to mention any of this to his employer. Two individuals, both of whom are lying constantly, are the load-bearing elements of an entire community. And I think that's why the Apocalypse episode works as well as it does. It isn't a departure, it's the natural consequence. Take away the two liars, and Langley Falls doesn't degrade, it drops. There's one more character I want to mention, and it's Avery Bullock, because we've circled him 3 or 4 times now, and he deserves a proper look. Bullock is Deputy Director of the CIA. He is Stan's superior, and by any reasonable measure, he is one of the most powerful people in the United States government. And what the show does with him, consistently, is show him as bored, not incompetent. Bored. He runs an intelligence agency the way a wealthy man runs an estate he has inherited and never wanted. He has avatars for personal use. He is, by fairly strong implication, bisexual and entirely relaxed about it. He gets involved in Stan's domestic nonsense, not because he has to, but because it's more interesting than his actual job. And I think that characterization is why the theories about him have so much traction. If you're going to nominate someone as the administrator of a secret experiment, or the man who's known about the alien for 20 years and hasn't said anything, you want someone with the power to do it, and no particular reason not to. Bullock has both. Now there's a question that sits underneath all of this that I want to spend the last proper section on, because it's the one that actually bothers people about this show. I want to take this seriously, because it's the oldest sustained fan argument about this show, and I don't think either side is being honest about it. The case for the prosecution goes like this. In the hurricane episode, the family stays home to ride it out, and over the course of that episode, Stan does a spectacular amount of damage to the people he lives with. He fires a harpoon at a bear, misses, and spears his wife into a wall. That's the one people always cite, and it's fair to cite it, because he shot her. He beats Jeff badly, which is admittedly consistent, since he said on multiple occasions that he hates Jeff. There's a shark that ends up in the house and takes Haley, and the theory holds that Stan had agents plant it. There's the fact that the house comes off its foundation, and the suggestion that he arranged that too. Add in the mural of the story, and a fairly long list of episodes where Stan's schemes require his family's suffering as a working part, and the argument is that the man simply doesn't like them and has been managing that fact for 2 decades. I don't buy it, but I want to explain why properly rather than just waving it away, because the counter-argument people usually give is weak. The weak version is he loves them in some episodes, therefore he doesn't hate them. That doesn't hold, because you can point to just as many where he doesn't. You end up counting episodes, and counting episodes is not analysis. The better version starts with the fact that if Stan wanted out, he could leave. He is a highly trained intelligence operative with access to memory wipes, cloning technology, and a professional network that could produce a new identity in an afternoon. He could vanish and nobody would ever find him. He has not. More than that, when he genuinely believed the world was ending, he did not leave them to it. That happens more than once. So what is it then, if it isn't hatred? Here's what I think. And I'll say up front that this is an opinion rather than something the show has confirmed. Stan was abandoned by his father, and then made to be his mother's partner at 11. And the specific lesson he took from that pair of experiences is that leaving is the worst thing a person can do. Not cruelty, not neglect, leaving. So Stan has built a rule for himself, and the rule is that he will never leave. He will be there. Every day for the rest of his life, he will be present. And because that's the only rule, everything else is permitted. He can shoot his wife with a harpoon because he'll still be there afterwards. He can sabotage his son's relationships because he isn't going anywhere. He can run schemes that require his family to be miserable because misery is survivable and abandonment, in his experience, isn't. Under that reading, Stan isn't a man who hates his family. He's a man operating with exactly one moral instruction given to him by a childhood nobody helped him with, and he is following it with total commitment while remaining catastrophically ignorant of every other obligation a person has, which is the same engine that makes him good at his job, incidentally. Total commitment to a single directive is precisely what the CIA wants in a field agent. It's just not what you want in a dad, and that's the thing I keep coming back to about American Dad, and it's why I think it's a better show than its reputation. Stan is not a stupid man. This gets misread constantly, because people arrive from Family Guy and expect the father to be an idiot. He isn't. He's a career weapons expert who has been operating successfully since the 80s. He's competent, he's disciplined, and in the field, he's frequently the smartest person present. The failure is entirely in one domain, and the domain is the one he cares most about, which is a much sadder and much more specific kind of character than the standard animated dad, and it's the reason the show has been able to run this long without the material going stale. There's always somewhere for it to go because the gap between what Stan wants and what Stan does is structural rather than situational. There's a related theory I'll mention because it's a genuinely interesting inversion, which is that Stan isn't insane by nature, but was made that way by the agency. The argument goes that Stan was originally extremely good at his job, so good that he began to notice how inept everything around him was. And rather than lose him, or have him start asking the wrong questions, the CIA adjusted him. They have the technology, they've used it on Bullock in an episode named after the procedure. So Stan's leaps of nonsensical reasoning, his inability to retain a lesson, and the moments where he does things that would kill a normal man aren't personality. They're damage, deliberately applied by his employer to keep a competent man harmless. I don't think that's true either, but it's another example of the thing this show does over and over, which is establish a capability early on and then never quite close the door on it. Once you've told an audience that your fictional agency can rewrite a person's mind, every subsequent inconsistency in every character becomes potential evidence. That's the price of building a world with that much machinery in it. You can't have a memory-wiping intelligence service in the background of your sitcom and then expect people not to wonder. And I think the writers know that. I think that's part of why the show keeps gesturing at it. Not because there's an answer waiting, but because the gesture is free and the audience does the rest, which is, when you get down to it, the most efficient way to make a show feel deeper than it is. And also, occasionally, the way a show accidentally becomes deeper than it was meant to be, because a joke you keep making for 20 years stops being a joke and starts being a fact about your world. That's happened to American Dad more than once. The truth about why Roger was sent here was a punchline. The persona problem was a running gag. Klaus was a premise. And all three of them, through sheer accumulation, have turned into something you can actually think about at 1 a.m, which is roughly what we've been doing. There's a fair bit left over, and none of it fits anywhere tidily, so I'm going to do what this show does and just wander through it. Start with Great Space Roaster, which we've touched on for the age, but not for what actually happens in it. The family roasts Roger for his birthday. He asks for it, and then he cannot handle it, because it turns out that a being who dispenses cruelty constantly has no capacity whatsoever to receive it, so he decides to destroy the planet. That's the escalation. A roast goes badly, and the response is planetary annihilation. And it works because of something the show established back in the very first season, which is that Roger's proportionality is not calibrated to anything. He'll plan an elaborate scheme for a blender. The theory attached to that episode is a good one, and it's about who Roger made each family member roast. The suggestion is that he forced each of them to roast the person they love most, specifically to maximise the damage. Which would mean Stan roasting Haley tells you Stan loves Haley most, and hides it because of the politics. Haley loves Steve most. Steve loves Francine most. Francine loves Stan. I've no idea if that's what was intended, but it produces a chain that feels right, and it's the sort of thing that only becomes visible once someone points at it. Then there's Roger Codger, which is the early episode where Roger apparently dies and the family have to deal with the body of an alien, which the CIA will very much want. It's one of the first times the show properly acknowledged the danger of the situation the Smiths are actually in, because that danger has never gone away. Every episode of this show takes place in a house containing evidence that would end the careers and probably the lives of everyone in it. There's a whole theory strand about this. The idea that Roger will eventually be caught, that he'll end up trapped somewhere with Bullock, that the two of them will become friends, and that Bullock will let him go, with a subplot in which the Smiths are hunted, interrogated, and nearly executed for harbouring him. That would be an enormous episode. I doubt it's coming. But everything required to make it is already in place and has been since 2005. The tearjerker episodes deserve a mention. These are the show's Bond parodies, with Roger as the villain, and they're some of the most technically accomplished things it's ever produced. The animation shifts, the score goes properly cinematic, and the whole thing is played with a straight enough face that it works as pastiche rather than mockery. That orchestra we talked about earns its money in those episodes. Stephen Snott's test tubular adventure is worth mentioning for the sheer commitment of the premise. The two of them use Stan's CIA lab equipment to grow themselves girlfriends, and what they produce are babes in the literal sense, infants, which they then have to raise to an appropriate age before the school dance. That's a joke about the word babe stretched into 22 minutes, and it holds. There's a genuinely unpleasant fan theory attached to it, which is that during the climax, Stan may have shot the girl that one of the clones was cloned from, mistaking her for the clone. It's not in the episode, it's an actual aired scene in the episode, and people advocate for it on the grounds that this is exactly the sort of violent mistake Stan makes, which, honestly, is a fair reading of the character, even if it's not a fair reading of the episode. Spelling Bee My Baby I mentioned in passing during the Jeff arc, but the main plot is lovely. Steve deliberately fails a spelling bee to express his feelings for Akiko, who is also competing, and rather than simply losing, he spells out the names of Tyler Perry films. That's a very specific way to throw a competition. Finances with Wolves is the episode that changed Klaus. Before it, Klaus had an obsessive and frankly grim crush on Francine, and made repeated advances. In that episode, Stan saves his life, despite the fact that Klaus had been trying to sleep with his wife. And after that, Klaus did not stop, which is a small piece of character work that most shows wouldn't bother with. A bad behaviour ends because someone did something decent, but it doesn't stay ended. 1,600 Candles is Roger's birthday episode, and it contains the detail I find most affecting about the Roger and Klaus relationship. Klaus was the only member of the household who remembered. He prepared a surprise, and Roger, who is not moved by things, was genuinely moved. Two beings who spend most of their time being appalling to each other, and one of them remembered a date. Roger and Me we've covered as the possible origin point for the persona split, but the episode itself is about a best friend ritual, and the aftermath is that Roger is carrying 3 sets of memories with perfect recall, which, if you think about it, is a horror premise delivered as a friendship story. Stan of Arabia is the 2-parter where Stan moves the family to Saudi Arabia after embarrassing himself at work, and it's one of the sharper things the show did early on. It's also the episode where Francine explicitly flags Stan's tendency to go native wherever he lands, which is a real pattern in him, and one that connects back to the abandonment thing. He's constantly looking for a system to belong to, and Roots, which I'll mention purely because it was written by the same pair who later wrote the 200th episode, Brett Corley and Robert Masher, and it's always nice when you can trace a writing partnership through a show. There's one more structural oddity I want to flag before we close, and it's about how the show is counted. The season numbering for American Dad has never been settled. There are 2 competing models, and both of them have been used by the network at various times. Sometimes in the same year, sometimes on 2 different Fox-operated websites simultaneously. The disagreement started right at the beginning over whether the first 7 episodes and the following 16 are 1 season or 2, and it has propagated forward ever since, which means that if you go and look up any episode of this show, the season number you get depends entirely on which source you ask. The 200th episode is season 11 or season 13. The 150th is season 8 or season 9. I've tried to keep to one system throughout tonight, and I'll admit I may not have entirely succeeded, because nobody has. The show has been on the air for 2 decades, and there is still no agreement on how much of it there is. Which feels appropriate somehow. A program about an agency that edits records, whose own records nobody can agree on. American Dad exists because 2 men were annoyed about an election. That's the origin, and MacFarlane has been completely open about it. He and Matt Weitzman were sufficiently frustrated with the Bush administration after the 2000 election that they spent days just complaining to each other, and eventually decided they should channel it into something creative and, in his words, hopefully profitable. Barker's account of getting the call is even more casual. About 18 months before the premiere, Seth rang and asked whether he and Matt would be interested in a show about a right-wing CIA agent and his liberal daughter. Barker said it was right up their alley, and everything fell into place from there. So the pitch, in a sentence, was a conservative father and a liberal daughter arguing. And what that actually is, and the creators have acknowledged the lineage, is all in the family, almost line for line. Look at the mapping. Stan is Archie Bunker, the blustering reactionary patriarch. Haley is Gloria, the daughter with opposing politics. Jeff is Michael Stivich, the liberal hippie boyfriend, who becomes the husband and who the father cannot stand. And in both shows, the daughter lives in her parents' house with that partner, which is the engine that forces the argument to happen every single day rather than at holidays. It's a good structure. It ran for years in live action, and it produced one of the most important sitcoms ever made. An American Dad abandoned it almost immediately. Weitzman has said why, and the reason is refreshingly unglamorous. The political banter between Stan and Haley had, in his phrase, a limited shelf life. It didn't give them as much as they'd expected. There are still times when that dynamic surfaces, but nothing like the first season, and he thinks the show grew and benefited from dropping it because it would have got boring. I think he's right, and I want to spend a moment on why, because it explains something about political comedy generally. The problem with building a show on an argument is that the argument doesn't develop. Stan says a conservative thing, Haley says a liberal thing, and then next week they do it again. There's no accumulation. The characters can't learn anything, because if either of them learned anything, the premise would be over. So you're left with a machine that produces the same scene indefinitely. Which is exactly the trap that a lot of political comedy falls into, and it's why so much of it ages badly. It's not that the opinions become unfashionable, it's that a joke built on a position rather than a person has nowhere to go once the position stops being current. American Dad got out of that trap early, and the new focus of the show is the thing Barker described as the human condition. Ego, bureaucracy, family, feelings everyone recognises regardless of what they voted for. And that's why the show works now, 21 years later, and why watching season 1 is a genuinely different experience from watching anything after about season 4. Season 1 is a show about the news. Everything after is a show about a family that happens to have an alien in it. There is a cost to that, and I want to be fair about it. Haley lost her function. She was built to be one half of an argument, and when the argument was retired, the writers had to work out what she was for, and it took them a while. There are stretches in the middle seasons where Haley is the least defined person in that house, which is a strange thing to say about a character who was originally a co-lead. She does get sorted out eventually, largely through the Jeff material, which gave her something to be other than a position. But there's a period where the show clearly doesn't know. And the same thing, in reverse, is what happened to Roger. He was built to be a contained observer and turned into the engine of the entire program. 2 characters adjusted in opposite directions because the writers found out what was working by making it and watching. Which is worth saying plainly, because there's a tendency to talk about long-running shows as though they were designed. They weren't. This one started as a topical argument with an elf in the corner, and what it became was decided by 2 showrunners noticing what got laughs, and following it over a decade, while nobody was looking too hard. MacFarlane's own arc through this is the part I find most human. He created it, handed it over, didn't understand it, described himself as going along for the ride, and then gradually became a fan of a program with his name on it, which is either a very healthy attitude to creative ownership or a slightly sad thing to admit about your own work, and I honestly can't decide which. I suspect it's the first one. You have to let a thing become itself. There's a last thought I'll add to this, and then I'll leave the politics alone. The show never actually resolved its own argument, and I don't think it was ever going to. Stan doesn't become liberal. Haley doesn't become conservative. Neither of them is proved right about anything, and on the rare occasions the show does take a side, it's usually on something so specific that it doesn't generalise. The one exception, and people have noticed this, is that acceptance of gay people is basically the only lesson Stan actually retains across the run. He gets better at that and stays better. Everything else resets, which is a slightly odd thing to be the exception. But it's consistent, and consistency in this show is worth something. I've wondered whether it stuck because it was the one belief the writers weren't willing to keep resetting for a joke, and I suspect that's exactly it. There are things you can play as a running gag, and things you decide you'd rather not. And every long-running show ends up quietly drawing that line somewhere. American Dad drew it there. Make of that what you will. Here's the thing I've kept noticing while putting all this together. American Dad has never been about its mysteries. Not in the way we've treated them tonight. It isn't withholding anything. There's no answer being saved for a finale, no plan that got interrupted, no grand design sitting behind the alien, or the fish, or the gold object that keeps ruining people. It's a show that will build a 3-season arc about a man's brain being moved into an alien body, follow every consequence properly, including the ones about biology, resolve it with care, and then air an episode about a hot tub. And I think that's genuinely the correct way to have made this show. Because if the writers had treated any of this material as precious, it would have collapsed under its own weight years ago. The reason the world feels big is that nobody in it is impressed by it. The reason the lore holds up is that the show never sat you down and explained it. There's plenty we didn't get to, by the way. The Christmas run has more in it than I covered. Bullock could carry an hour on his own. The cold opens are their own subject entirely, and I've been quietly building a list. Any of those could be a video. Probably will be at some point. But if you take one thing away from all this, I'd make it the thing about the goodbyes. 3 separate times people who worked on this show sat down and wrote it an ending, because they didn't believe it would get one. 3 times they were wrong, and it's still going. Back where it started on a Sunday night, after 21 years of being the other one. I find that quietly cheap.